Good morning, everybody. We'll go ahead and get started today. Thank you all for joining us for our industrial hygiene series. Today, as you can see, our topic is going to be on the synergy of ergonomics and industrial hygiene monitoring in the physical workspace and the risks. This series is brought to you by the Southwest Center for Occupational Environmental Health. We are a NIOSH Education and Research Center here at the UTHealth School of Public Health. And my name is Lacey Davis. I'm the new Director of Continuing Education and Outreach here. We're very excited to have three wonderful speakers with us today. This webinar is traditionally a bi-monthly webinar of industrial hygiene and safety professionals, in which we discuss emerging issues and best practices overall in occupational safety and health. So thank you very much for joining us. Today we have three great lineup of experts on us, and in between each talk we will be giving a 5-minute break just in case you need to grab an extra coffee or go to the restroom, whatever you need to do. So don't worry about that. We'll give little breaks in between. A few housekeeping rules. I know we're all experts at webinars at this point, but just remember to keep your devices muted. Please wait till after the presentation. We're going to give about 10 to 15 minutes after each presentation for questions. So feel free to either raise your hand towards the end or put it in the chat, or just wait till they're finished and be able to ask your questions. All right, so we'll get started. First, we have Stephen Mills. He's a safety specialist at KBR NASA. He holds a master's in public health in occupational environmental health science, specializing in industrial hygiene, a past trainee here as well of UTHealth Southwest Center, which is great. He's currently working in the aerospace industry for KBR Inc. and he's contracted by NASA on the Human Health and Performance contract as a safety specialist on site at Johnson Space Center. So, Stephen, go ahead and take it away for us.
All right, thank you for the introduction. Bear with me real quick as I try to share my screen. Okay.
It's good.
All right, welcome everyone. My name is Stephen Mills. I go by Austin, and as Lacey said, I'm a Master of Public Health in Occupational and Environmental Health Science, specializing in industrial hygiene from the University of Texas Health Science Center at Houston, and a safety specialist for KBR on the Human Health and Performance contract at NASA Johnson Space Center. And today we'll embark on a journey beyond the horizon, venturing into the realms of office ergonomics at NASA's Johnson Space Center. This morning we'll explore the potential hazards of poor office ergonomics and the measures we take through the Human Health and Performance contract to mitigate these risks and safeguard our valued workforce. To give a little bit of a background, the Human Health and Performance contract, we are dedicated to ensuring the health, safety, and performance of astronauts throughout all phases of spaceflight. This includes researching the effects of spaceflight on the human body, developing countermeasures to mitigate those effects, and providing medical support to astronauts during missions. Our activities enable mission success, optimizing human health and productivity in spaceflight before, during, and after the actual spaceflight experience of our flight crews. And we also provide ground support-based functions as well. One of our sayings here on the Human Health and Performance contract is we put the human in human spaceflight. The Human Health and Performance contract, we safeguard a vast and diverse workforce at NASA's Johnson Space Center. So this encompasses a wide range of personnel, including engineers, scientists, administrative staff, and support personnel. With such a diverse group, ergonomics becomes even more critical in preventing musculoskeletal disorders, which can affect people in various job functions. Ergonomics, which is the science of designing the workplace to fit the worker, plays a mission-critical role here at NASA. This involves optimizing workstations, tools, and tasks to minimize physical stress and strain on employees. By incorporating ergonomic principles, we can improve comfort, we can boost productivity, and most importantly, reduce the risk of developing musculoskeletal disorders. Here at NASA, ensuring a safe and healthy work environment is paramount, and ergonomics allows employees to perform their critical tasks effectively, whether they're supporting missions on Earth or ensuring the success of future space endeavors. Musculoskeletal disorders, or MSDs, for a brief background, for individuals that do not already know what a musculoskeletal disorder is. Musculoskeletal disorders are injuries or conditions that affect the musculoskeletal system. This includes muscles, tendons, ligaments, nerves, bones, and joints. Common examples of musculoskeletal disorders include carpal tunnel syndrome, lower back pain, tendonitis, and many others. Musculoskeletal disorders can cause anywhere between mild to significant pain, discomfort, and even long-term disability for affected individuals. This can lead to lost work days, reduced productivity, and ultimately a significant impact on both the employee and the organization. So several factors can contribute to the development of musculoskeletal disorders, and we can categorize these factors as occupational and non-occupational. Occupational risk factors. So let's focus on the occupational risk factors that are most relevant to poor office ergonomics. These risk factors include repetitive tasks, so performing the same movements repeatedly, especially with awkward postures or forceful exertions, can lead to musculoskeletal disorders. Common examples in office settings include typing, data entry. These repetitive motions can lead to conditions like carpal tunnel syndrome, tendonitis, and neck pain. Awkward postures is another risk factor. So maintaining awkward postures for extended periods can put excessive stress on muscles and joints. This can include hunching over a keyboard, reaching for objects in awkward positions, or sitting for long periods of time without breaks. These postures can lead to back pain, neck pain, shoulder pain, etc. Static postures we would like to take into consideration as well. Sitting for long periods without breaks can lead to tight muscles and discomfort. It's important to get up and move around regularly throughout your workday. Improper workstation setup. An improperly set up workstation can contribute to various musculoskeletal disorders. This includes incorrect chair height, monitor positioning that strains your neck, keyboard placement that forces awkward wrist positions, or a lack of proper armrests to support your forearms. Other occupational risk factors that exist, such as forceful exertions, lifting, pushing, pulling, vibration from tools or equipment, and working at extreme temperatures, can impact the body and may result in musculoskeletal disorder development if those are not mitigated in the future. However, the ones we've discussed previously are the most relevant to office settings. For non-occupational risk factors, there are non-occupational risk factors that can contribute to musculoskeletal disorders, such as age. As we age, our bodies become less resilient to stress and strain. Pre-existing medical conditions, certain medical conditions such as arthritis, obesity, they can lead to the likelihood of musculoskeletal disorder development if those are not mitigated for the future. Fitness level. Lower fitness levels can make individuals more prone to musculoskeletal disorders. So maintaining good muscle strength and flexibility can help protect individuals against injuries. Leisure activities or recreational activities. So repetitive motions or awkward postures from hobbies or sports can contribute to musculoskeletal disorders. And by understanding these risk factors, both occupational and non-occupational, we can take steps to prevent musculoskeletal disorders and promote a healthy musculoskeletal system. Our approach through mitigating ergonomic risks. So through the Human Health and Performance Contract, we take a proactive approach to mitigating ergonomic risks and preventing musculoskeletal disorders at NASA Johnson Space Center. Here is how we achieve this. One thing that we do, we provide ergonomic assessments. So upon request, we conduct comprehensive ergonomic assessments for both new and existing individuals. This involves evaluating workstations, tasks, and individual risk factors to identify potential hazards. As previously mentioned, this is the form that we utilize on the Human Health and Performance contract when performing an ergonomic assessment for our employees. Prior to conducting the assessment, we allow the employee to fill out the assessment sheet down to section F. So the employee will provide us their name, manager, their job title, department, the location in which they're working, email or phone number, and if they are a full or part-time employee. We also would like to know their ergonomic history. So new employees, we would like to know if this is a new or an existing employee. Maybe they relocated to a new workstation and they would like to get their workstation evaluated so it's best fit for them from an ergonomic standpoint. So is it a new workstation? Is it an existing workstation? And do they routinely experience pain or discomfort? And below, we would like to identify the areas in which these individuals are experiencing pain or discomfort. Because if we don't know what's going on, then we're going to have a difficult time addressing their concerns. So we would like to know, are they experiencing pain in the neck, shoulders, elbows, forearms, hands, wrists, fingers, ankles, feet, thighs? Maybe they're experiencing headaches, lower legs. And then we would like to know the frequency. Are you experiencing these symptoms seldom, often, or do you always experience these symptoms? And then the severity as well. So is it mild, is it moderate, severe, and unbearable? This information is critical because it drives whether or not we should follow up with the employee after performing this ergonomic assessment. And then whenever we do implement our mitigation measures, has this assisted in reducing or mitigating the pain and the frequency in which these individuals are experiencing? Yeah, and we would like to know, do the individuals feel like the pain they're experiencing is a result of their workstation? If not, what do they believe the problem? What do they believe is causing the problem? Do they perform any outside activities, recreational activities? Maybe they play tennis and their elbow starts to hurt. That could be a non-occupational risk factor, and that could be a result or a contributor to their pain and eventually musculoskeletal disorder development if we do not mitigate the risks while they're in the occupational setting. Do they have pre-existing injuries? So for me, I played football throughout my life. I've had 2 shoulder surgeries on both my shoulders. I've had 2 ACL surgeries. So I know that I already have a non-occupational risk factor that might impact me, and I take steps through our ergonomic assessments. I do ergonomic assessment, that way we can evaluate my workstation because I know I'm already predisposed to musculoskeletal disorder development. We would like to know, how much time do you spend on electronics? Let's say this individual is a sonographer, or maybe they are a flight controller and they work 8 to 9 hours a day on a computer and they experience headaches or dry eyes frequently. Well, if you're experiencing this at work, then we'll do our best to mitigate that while you're here. But if you're also going home and you're playing Call of Duty, Minecraft, you're performing these recreational activities for greater than 2 hours, 1 to 2 hours, you're spending excessive amount of time on electronics, that non-occupational risk factor can exacerbate those conditions. We would like to know, do you smoke? We'll go through and we'll say, okay, how long do you spend at a computer a day? For my previous example, a flight controller, a sonographer, they're going to be at the computer, they're going to be at their workstation 8 to 9 hours a day. We would like to know, how long do you spend at this particular workstation? Do you get up? Do you move around? Do you have the equipment needed to kind of help locate materials so that you're not being put in awkward postures? Do you have a document holder? Do you have headsets? We would like to know, how often do you get up? So most individuals, they don't take the time to get up after they walk around, stretch, once they have been working for prolonged periods of time. And I will address that later as we move along. We would like to also know present conditions, so we'll evaluate the individual's posture. So whenever I go through these ergonomic assessments, I'm going to have the individual actually perform their tasks for me. So if they're working in an office environment, okay, perform your task. I'm going to do an observation and I'm going to analyze what's your posture like. Is your head and neck upright or in line with your torso? Is your head or your trunk facing forward and you're not off to the side looking like this? You're looking like this and you're experiencing neck pain. You're in an awkward posture. We would like to try to address your posture. Is your trunk perpendicular to the floor? Shoulders and upper arms are in line with your torso? Are your forearms and your hands in a straight line and parallel to the floor? Maybe you're experiencing shoulder issues, but you also kind of work like this, where you're chicken winged out and it's causing a little bit of shoulder impingement. Let's see, are your thighs parallel to the floor? Maybe you're experiencing knee or leg issues, but you're not at a 90-degree angle whenever you're sitting and your feet aren't flat on the floor. So that could be exacerbating some issues, whether it be existing or non-existing. And then, as previously mentioned, do you stand for an hour? And then we would like to know, okay, what kind of equipment do they have already provided to them? And then are they utilizing this equipment properly? So it's a wrist rest being utilized properly. Some individuals don't have wrist rests, which can lead to the development of carpal tunnel syndrome if they're put in an awkward posture. Some people don't have mouse rests. So we do provide wrist and mouse rest to individuals. And on the next slide, or in the previous slides, we'll go over types of ergonomic equipment that we distribute to our employees and that we have permission to distribute, or is there something that we need to provide where we're going to have to get approval for submission? Is the individual's keyboard and mouse directly in front of the employee? We'll move on to the next slide. Is your keyboard and mouse on the same level? If your keyboard is up here and your mouse is down here, that's kind of putting yourself at an awkward posture that's putting you at risk for musculoskeletal disorder development. Is your keyboard, if you're utilizing a keyboard tray, is your keyboard tray used properly? Is it at the proper height? And is your mouse within reach of the user? If you're overreaching, you could be at risk for upper back trapezius discomfort and pain, maybe shoulder impingement. Is the monitor directly in front of the employee? So we can, after we evaluate the individual's posture, we go ahead and we evaluate their monitor and their visibility. Is the monitor glare holder in place or clipboard that's being utilized? What I see most often, and individuals at home, you're in your office environment right now. So you're in an office setting, you're at your workstation. So as we follow along, feel free to evaluate your own workstation as we're going through this, because I can most likely guarantee from my assessments of individuals here on site that your monitor level, we would like to see it where the topmost line and where the URL is directly within your line of sight. We would like to see this because if you're looking more upward to view the material on your screen, you're looking downward, that's causing some neck issues, some trapezius issues that puts you at risk for future pain and discomfort, and also risk of musculoskeletal disorder development. We also evaluate the individual's chair. So is their chair appropriately sized? Is there proper padding, proper lumbar support? Seat pan depth, is it adjustable? It slides out, it slides back. Is the height adjustable? It goes up, it goes down. And then we will go ahead and we will adjust the chair for the individual that we're performing ergonomic assessments for so that it properly fits them, that they feel comfortable, and that we are confident that these adjustments are going to reduce the risk of musculoskeletal disorder development, or it will mitigate their pain. From then, we go ahead and we get measurements of the individual's workstation. So we're going to get dimensions of the desk surface, the length. We like to know how long the desk is, the depth, how far does the desk go back, and the height as well. The height is crucial. Does this individual have sufficient knee or feet space? We recommend at least 15 to 24 inches for users' knees. We would like to get the size of an individual's monitor and then their viewing distance as well. Well, we recommend anywhere between 18 to 30 inches from you viewing your monitor. If you're less than 18 inches, we'll adjust the monitor to where it sits further back. If you're further than 30 inches, we'll try to bring you or the monitor closer towards you. That way it helps out with digital eye strain, it helps out with headaches, which can also lead to additional conditions down the road. Keyboard height. So how far up does the keyboard come? This is going to play a role in part 8. We're going to calculate keyboard height from the computer desk surface height. So if I have my desk surface is 30 inches and my keyboard height is half an inch. So my measurement for my workstation would be like 30.5 inches. From there, we will go to section 8 and we'll get the measurement of an individual's tip of their elbow to the floor. So we'll have them rest their arms as if they're typing, and we will get that measurement. If that measurement between your tip of your elbow and the overall desk height for your workstation is greater than 2 inches, then that puts you at improper posture. If it's greater than 2 inches, it could be you're sitting lower and your arms are like this, which puts strain on your wrists, or it's too high, which also puts strain on your wrist, putting you at risk for carpal tunnel syndrome, potentially. From there, we move on to our findings and corrective actions. So once we have all of this information, we'll put it in this area. And if an individual has a greater than 2 inches deviation between their 90-degree tip of their elbow to their workstation, we'll go ahead and we'll put in a request to JSC furniture or KBR furniture. That way we can lower or raise their desk to get them within that 0 to 2 inch dimension, so that the likelihood of that individual developing carpal tunnel syndrome is mitigated. And then we also have information at the very bottom here of ergonomic equipment. So we can provide document holders, ergonomic keyboards, which I have, an ergonomic mouse. An ergonomic mouse can be kind of tilted upward so that your wrist isn't at an awkward posture and it's not laying flat on the desk surface, and it's more kind of the side of your arm, so it's kind of angled, or you have a trackball wheel as well that you can provide to individuals. We provide footrests or mouse bridges. Footrests are pretty crucial for our shorter individuals. Sometimes they they need to have their hair raised so that they can be within that 0 to 2 inch mark for their variation between their elbow tip and their desk height. So allowing for the footrest to be accommodated will have their feet flat on, not the floor, but it will be flat on the wrist rest, or not the wrist rest, the footrest. We have glare filters for individuals who have sensitivity to blue light or experience digital eye strain, which we will discuss later. We also provide keyboard trays for individuals and lumbar support seat cushions. And that's all the equipment that we can distribute without approval. We also provide monitor risers and wrist and mouse wrists. Almost every time I perform an ergonomic assessment, I provide wrist and mouse rest to individuals. That cushion helps prevent carpal tunnel syndrome, and most of the time individuals do not have a wrist and mouse rest. So it's crucial that we provide those to our employees. So ergonomic equipment that we will need approval for, we have anti-fatigue mats, we have ergonomic chairs, monitor arms, numeric keypads. The highlight here is sit-stand workstations. So for tall individuals or for individuals who are working 8 to 9 hours and they feel like they don't have the time to take that 5-minute ergonomic break every hour, providing a sit-stand workstation will allow them to be able to get out of their static posture, get out of their seated posture, and to be able to stand helping alleviate any strain on the back. For a sit-stand workstation, we require that our employees provide us a physician's note that says that they do not have any pre-existing conditions that will be exacerbated due to them having a sit-stand workstation. So not that they do have a condition that will require them to have it, but that they do not have a condition that will be exacerbated. A little bit different. We also provide other specialty items as well. But essentially, that is our ergonomic assessment in a nutshell. Our approach to mitigating ergonomic risks, we also provide, based on the assessment findings, we provide personalized recommendations to optimize workstations and work practices for each employee. So, as previously mentioned, this may involve adjustments to chair height, position or monitor positioning, keyboard type, so the ergonomic keyboard, and we might even suggest alternative work practices to minimize repetitive strain. We also offer brief one-slide educational resources that are called zero harm moments. Your areas might call them safety moments. They can be called various things, but they're all interchangeable essentially. So our zero harm moments are tailored towards a variety of occupational and non-occupational topics, including ergonomics. These can cover various subjects such as combating eye strain or proper lifting techniques. These resources are a great way to promote awareness and encourage healthy habits among employees. It's also where it's a brief one slide information. It's easy to go over whenever you're having meetings. So if you're having a staff meeting, if you're having a management meeting, it's a quick 5-minute topic that engages our audience in safety, and we like to provide that information. That way it's accessible to everyone. And we'll go over a few zero harm moments that I have created with you all. So here we have an ergonomic topic for our zero harm moment. It's called neck pain and office ergonomics. So poor office ergonomics contributes to the issues of neck, back, and shoulder stress through prolonged postures without breaks, making sure if your topmost readable line on your computer monitor is not directly in your line of sight, it might cause you to look up or down, which might put you in an awkward posture, resulting in neck or shoulder stress, as well as inadequate chair support and seat height, which could cause unnatural head and body positions. Forward head posture caused by poor office ergonomics can cause stress on the neck, back, and shoulders as well, forcing the neck to support the weight of the head, straining neck muscles. It can create a rounded shoulder position, leading to shoulder tension and discomfort. It can overload the trapezius muscles in the upper back, resulting in pain and stiffness, and it can increase pressure on our spinal discs. The solution to this, frequent breaks in movement. Make sure that you take regular breaks to stand, stretch, and walk, reducing strain from prolonged sitting. Monitor height adjustment. So make sure you set your monitor at eye level to promote a natural head position, reducing neck strain, and posture awareness, maintaining good postures by keeping your head, neck, and back aligned while working. And consider using ergonomic accessories like keyboard trays or monitor stands to facilitate this. In regard to our previous slide, with the ergonomic assessments, almost every time that I complete an ergonomic assessment, I ensure that I provide the employee with information on micro breaks. So regardless of your position, I always recommend taking a 5-minute micro break every hour, either to stretch, to walk around and stand up. And if you do not feel like doing those two, maybe take a ergonomic break for mindfulness. A lot of individuals have a lot of tasks going on here at Johnson Space Center. They feel like sometimes they can't take that break because they have so much going on, or they're just so into their job that they just want to ensure that They get everything done and they don't take the breaks. They're sitting there for a few hours, and that can result in musculoskeletal disorders if you're not taking those breaks. So I always ensure, 5 minutes every hour stretch. And I do offer ergonomics tips for stretches. So if you're at home, I could almost guarantee that most of us have not stretched today. Some good stretches that we can go across. So making sure that you have your arm across your body, put your palm on your elbow, bring it in, hold for 5 seconds. The other way, this will work as well. This one, put your elbow up to the ceiling and the palm of your hand in the middle of your back. Bring your arm around and pull down. Hold for about 5 to 10 seconds. Same with the opposite direction. This one for you at home, if you all work in an office environment, I can guarantee that you all will feel this one. So palm forward, kind of bring it back into your body for about 5 seconds. This will help reduce carpal tunnel syndrome and down for about 5 to 10 seconds. For neck tension and upper shoulder tension, we go side to side with our neck for about 5 to 10 tilts each side. If you have your own office, lucky for you. If you don't have your own office, some individuals feel like whenever they do this stretch, they look a little crazy around their peers, but it's just a rotation of your head in a full circle, 5 to 10 motions each. I can guarantee you, if you do these at home, you're following along with me, you might feel some pops, you might feel some pulls, but that's totally okay. It's normal, and if you're following along, I can guarantee you that after you do these stretches, you're going to feel so much better. You'll notice the difference. It'll help alert you. It'll help wake you up. It'll help make you feel more productive throughout the day. As well as those, if you are at a desk, you can also grab the front of your desk and kind of roll your chair out a little bit. And that way, it's pulling on your upper back and your shoulders, and then you'll kind of want to squeeze your shoulder blades together. Whenever I do this stretch, it usually gets a good pop out of my back. A couple of other things that you can do is calf stretches. So find something that you can put your calf up on, have your toes kind of up into the air a little bit, have something that you can pull yourself into. Once you pull yourself in, you'll be able to feel that stretch in your calf. And then you can also do a thigh or quad stretch as well. Yeah, sorry about the providing these tips, but I thought it was crucial. I wanted to share that with you all before we move on to our next zero harm moment. So for our next zero harm moment, we have combating eye strain. So there's a good chance that you spend a lot of hours staring at some kind of computer monitor, whether it's a computer, laptop, a smartphone. So focusing on any type of the above for a long time can cause eye strain, fatigue, and headaches. Eyes can also feel parched, red, gritty. Eye strain is a common condition that occurs when a person's eyes get tired from intense usage. People who look at screens for 2 or more hours in a row every day have the greatest risk of having eye strain. One way to combat eye strain is to follow the 20-20-20 rule. I always provide this information for individuals who are working in an office setting as well after I do my ergonomic assessments. So take a break every 20 minutes by looking at something 20 feet away for 20 seconds. This allows your eyes time to relax, to focus on something else besides a computer monitor. And there are also other tips to prevent eye strain as well. So you can keep your screen at arm's length, make sure it's within that 18 to 30 inch range. You can adjust the font size if you feel like you're squinting too much, if the font's too small, enlarge it. You can avoid screen glare from lighting. You can close nearby blinds or use a matte anti-glare screen to reduce glare. If your work allows for you to remove light bulbs in the area, or to provide something called a cozy shade, which kind of has magnets that go over a lighting source with a polyester material that's flame retardant, so it will not cause a fire, that reduces the light within that area. And we provide those. That is good as well to mitigate digital eye strain. Um, it You can avoid dry eyes, keep eye drops handy and to lubricate your eyes and within a nearby area so you can have accessibility to that. And you can adjust your screen's brightness as well. A couple of other things that you can do to mitigate digital eye strain. So as long as your hands are clean, of course, rub underneath your eyes for about 5 to 10 seconds in little circular motions. This will help reestablish blood flow in the area. It will also help with the lubrication of your eyes as well. You could rub your eyes in little circular motions. Something you can also do if you feel like your eyes are getting dry, if you're getting headaches, if you need a break, you can close your eyes, and then it's called palming. And you can palm over your eyes and just like kind of press in for about 5 to 10 seconds. And that will help, again, lubricate your eyes. It allows your eyes to have a break from staring at computer screens for prolonged periods of time. And it can assist with the mitigation of digital eye strain and headaches as well. Another topic that we have, this will be our final zero harm topic that we'll go over today, is lower back pain and office ergonomics. So what factors result in poor office ergonomics? Well, we have inadequate lumbar support, incorrect chair height, prolonged periods of sitting, poor posture, and lack of movement. So poor office ergonomics may result in a variety of musculoskeletal disorders, including lower back pain. Pain can range from moderate to severe due to various factors, including muscle strain, poor posture, pre-existing injury or current injury, and underlying medical conditions. The solution to this, you can adjust your lumbar support. Chairs with insufficient or non-adjustable lumbar support can cause the lower back to curve, straining the muscles and cause discomfort. You can also adjust your chair height. If a chair is set too high or too low, it can lead to awkward postures, causing a strain on your lower back. Poor posture as well. Leaning forward, slouching, or hunching over can disrupt the spine's natural curvature, straining the lower back. And we want to ensure that if you are experiencing this pain and discomfort due to poor office ergonomics, that our employees contact us. SWCOEH is the Safety, Health, Environmental Office. I'm one of 2 safety specialists in SWCOEH on the Human Health and Performance contract, and we have a large workforce. So I often get to perform these ergonomic assessments, and most of the time I am able to. I don't believe there has been an occurrence where I haven't mitigated an individual's pain, and that's satisfying for me to know that an individual was uncomfortable, to know that they were experiencing pain, and then to come back 2 weeks later and that what I have provided them and my adjustments and the information that I've provided them has alleviated that pain. That's really gratifying. We also have a ergonomics committee. So to ensure a comprehensive and effective ergonomics program, we have a dedicated ergonomics committee that meets bi-monthly. This committee comprises representatives from various departments and disciplines, which include industrial hygienists, safety specialists, and employee health representatives. We also include individuals who are not in these fields as well. If you want information on ergonomics and you want to join the ergonomics committee, then by all means, please join us. We will gladly provide you with the information. And the committee works collaboratively to discuss ergonomic issues and concerns raised by employees or identified through assessments. We can review and update ergonomic program policies and procedures through our committee meetings with collaboration. And we develop and implement new strategies for promoting a safe and healthy work environment for our staff. Something that we have been discussing, so digital eye strain. This is a topic that we have discussed recently in our ergonomics committee. Digital eye strain is a cause for concern. Looking at digital devices for prolonged periods of time, reading without resting your eyes, bright light or glare, straining to see dim light, or underlying eye conditions. People with uncorrected vision or dry eyes. Let's say you did have corrected vision, you have had LASIK. Individuals who have had LASIK are predisposed to having dry eyes and are at greater risk of digital eye strain. And stress and fatigue. If you're experiencing this, and you're experiencing pain, you're experiencing headaches, that can not only impact your physical health, it can impact your mental and emotional health as well. It can lead to stress and physical fatigue. Those are contributing factors to digital eye strain. Health and safety. There's three pillars I would like to say in my point of view. There's physical, there's mental, and there's emotional. If we have one of these pillars begin to have a shift, one collapses, all three starts to collapse. If you start to experience physical issues that can cause pain, that can cause discomfort, which will change your emotional state of mind, and it could also impact your mental state of mind as well, which may result in a loss of productivity. But at the end of the day, we would like to make sure that the mental health of our employees are taken care of, because a happy workforce is what we all strive to have. So correcting eye strain, we discussed this previously. So 18 to 30 inches is the ideal range. Outside of this range, eyes have to work harder to focus. Be sure your monitor's at the correct height. Topmost line is in your direct field of view. Adjust contrast on your monitors if you need. We've discussed this. I'm a firm believer, take frequent breaks. Take the 5 minutes to stretch. If you don't feel like stretching, take the 5 minutes to walk around. If you don't feel like walking around, take 5 minutes to think of something mindful. Close your eyes. Think of something that makes you happy. Think of a loved one. Think of an activity. Think of a memory. There's a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety that could go on with working. We work, if you think about it, most individuals work 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. You do the math, that's a third of your life you're spending working. The other third of your life you're spending sleeping. The other third of your life you're spending doing recreational activities, spending time with your family, eating, driving, brushing your teeth, things of that nature. So a good percentage of our life we're going to be spending here at work. So just take the time to take care of yourself. If you can't take care of yourself, that can result in various things, change of emotional state of mind, change of mental health. It can impact your relationships with people outside of work, and just try to take care of yourself. Make sure that the baggage here at work is left whenever you leave work. Eye strain and adjustment, adjust the brightness and contrast. If you have a dark mode option, turn on the dark mode option. This can help reduce glare, improve readability, especially in low light conditions. We discussed this earlier. Font and text size, you can adjust those. If you're colorblind, you can adjust color schemes to opt for higher contrast colors or different colors that help you with your condition. If you are colorblind, try to avoid the reds, the greens, and you can utilize anti-glare filters as well. Key exercises, if you do experience digital eye strain, palming, eye rolls, just like we did with the neck rolls. Just do little circles, maybe 10 motions each direction. Refocusing, the 20-20-20 rules. Look at something 20 feet away every 20 minutes for 20 seconds, or slowly blinking as well. The Ergonomics Committee, in addition to the functions that we mentioned earlier, we also, the Ergonomics Committee does metrics tracking. The committee tracks key metrics such as the number of ergonomic assessments conducted, the types of interventions implemented, and the reported incidence of musculoskeletal disorders. By monitoring these metrics, we can gauge the program's effectiveness and identify areas of improvement. So in conclusion, maintaining a safe and healthy work environment is paramount not just for the well-being of our employees, but also for ensuring the continued success of NASA's critical missions. Through the Human Health and Performance Contract, we demonstrate our commitment to a comprehensive ergonomics program at NASA Johnson Space Center. Ergonomics plays a vital role in preventing musculoskeletal disorders and promoting a healthy, productive workforce. By working together, we can create a work environment that allows everyone to perform their best and reach for the stars, both literally and figuratively. So I encourage everyone to be mindful of their posture. We've been sitting here for a while. Whenever that 5-minute break comes up, take into mind the things that I've discussed. Consider the stretches that I've shown. If you don't feel like stretching, take that 5 minutes to walk around, grab your coffee, or take the 5 minutes to sit, close your eyes, do some palming, something, or think of something mindful, a loved one, at fond memory. And don't hesitate to request an ergonomic assessment in your workplace if you experience any discomfort. So remember, everyone has a role to play in preventing healthy work habits and preventing musculoskeletal disorders. With that being said, I want to thank you all for inviting me to speak at this event, and thank you all for your time. These are my references, and if you all have any questions, feel free to ask.
That was great. Thank you, Austin. I appreciate it. Does anybody want to have any questions for Austin? Open it up for a minute. Then we can take our 5-minute stretch breaks. I guess I have a question. How often are you giving these ergonomic assessments to people?
Typically, I give, and me and my group, we give about three to five a week, I would say. And sometimes there's groups that move to a different location, maybe a new building, and the managers will ask for ergonomic assessments for group moves. For example, we recently have a group of stenographers who need low light in order to see their computer screens effectively to do their tasks. Initially, these individuals were in an office setting in cubicle areas, but that caused issues with them being able to perform their duties. So we moved them to a area seclusive of the cubicle areas and provided them with a low lighting environment, lumbar support chairs, ergonomic chairs, and doing full ergonomic assessments for the team as well. So if a manager asks, we are gladly open and able to do these ergonomic assessments for individuals and provide equipment for them as needed. All right.
Good.
Thank you all. And during this 5-minute break, please take the time to adopt the things that I mentioned earlier.
All right. That was great. Thank you. All right, we'll take a 5-minute break and we will have our next speaker come on after us. Thank you so much. All right. That's about 5 minutes. Hopefully everybody got some stretches in or had time to get a little coffee break. All right, so next up, we are going to have Eileen Hoff. Oh, there she is. Hello. And she is a regional lead human factors specialist at Shell. She has more than 20 years of experience as a human factors practitioner, primarily in the energy sector, but her work is focused on supporting capital and organizational projects and technology development. She believes that the best part of her work is learning about the diverse business and energy and the people that she meets and learns from in the process. So we will let you go ahead and take it away, Miss Eileen.
Sure, thank you very much. So let me attempt to share my screen and put it in presentation mode. So hopefully everyone can see my slides and hear me. If for some reason there's a lot of quiet, somebody please speak up. My name is Eileen Hoff. I am speaking to you today about some work that is of interest to me and to a larger part of the human factors community. So it's not exactly in alignment with my day-to-day work, but it's something that I think is really interesting and very thought-provoking. I do live and work in the Houston area. And I realized suddenly that I'm coming up on 25 years. Time has definitely flown in my work, and I still love what I do every day. I hope each of you does too in the work that you do. I also worked in the space arena when I started my career before moving into an engineering firm and eventually into energy companies. And so I very much enjoy the diversity of experience, the people that you get to interact with, also the people that come from different industries. And that's, I think, part of will be reflected in my presentation. It's part of that idea that there are a lot of things that we make and do in this country. And so all of those things need to be reflected in how we approach work. I also wanted to say, because my son made me, that I have a UT class of 27 student in my household. So that's where my son and my money go to UT. And he said that I should endear myself to you all by telling you to hook 'em. So with those pleasantries out of the way, I wanted to remind you a little bit about what human factors was in case you have not recently taken a course or done some reading in that space. It's very similar to the definition that was shared a little earlier. So when I think about it, it's about the interaction of humans and the elements of a system. So maybe a little broader than the definition that was mentioned earlier. But when you break it down, what is that system? It's the work that people do. So everything from their actual task to the preparation for that, to the activities that come after the work, so the cleanup, the reporting out, all of those really important things. It's the equipment, so the things that make it go, right? The machinery, the tools, the resources that are actually involved in production of aircraft, of documentation in the banking industry, the movement of medications and tools in the hospital and surgical spaces. When we think about the environment, it's of huge overlap with our industrial hygiene colleagues. So it's light and noise and environmental temperatures, contact temperatures. It's about chemical exposures, exposures to other hazards in the workplace, and how we protect people. Because sometimes how we protect people from other hazards can create challenges from human factors, ergonomics perspective. If you're wearing a big bunny suit, you may not be as likely to get things done in the same way. Organizationally, we think about the people. What people do we need? What do we need them to do? We think about how they communicate, how they're organized, the processes and procedures that make those organizations go, and their culture is another huge part of that. The final aspect, or we call them factors when we think about human factors, is the people, right? All of us that are out there making up the workforce today. What skills, resources, knowledge, experience do we have? What capabilities do we have? What are our limitations? How does that vary within a population? How does that vary within different demographic sets? A 50, 60-year-old has different capabilities than a 20-year-old, when generally speaking. So when we think about human factors, those are the lenses that I try to make sure that I approach all of the work with. So what we're going to talk about today, now that you're all in that human factors frame of mind, is the impact of innovation, the challenges of automation. Automation is primarily how we see manufacturing and a lot of movement of tools, resources, and equipment in the future, and then problem-solving approaches, because I think it's always good to remember at the end of the day that we have the tools to solve the challenges that are out in front of us. So the impacts of innovation. For those of you who are maybe my age, you would remember 2001, A Space Odyssey, where HAL basically took over the spaceship that was going to Jupiter. If you didn't see it, I won't spoil it, but let's just say that technology thought it was maybe a bit more important than the human beings that were on the spaceship. So that was at one point what some people thought the vision of technology in our future might be. There's another joke that's been around almost as long that says that in the future, assets will be manned or overseen by a man and a dog. So we can be a bit more modern and say a person and a dog. But a man and a dog. So the man is there to feed the dog. The dog is there to make sure that the man does not touch anything. So it's this idea that in the future, everything will be hands off, that at least at most of the work front, the day-to-day operations won't really happen there. Controls and automations will allow us to remotely operate facilities, and there really won't be a lot to do there except take care of the dog. So in the future, though, as we've evolved, we don't have dogs that necessarily have to be fed. So this is an image similar to some of the technologies that you may have seen for robot dogs. I saw a great picture yesterday of one that they've actually made like a furry dog costume for the robots to wear. But maybe we don't need the man there to feed the dog anymore. Maybe the dog doesn't have a person to keep out of the circumstance. But maybe.
Sorry to interrupt you, Eileen. I don't think your slides are moving.
Oh, they're not?
It's still showing there we go. Okay. Sorry to interrupt. Yeah, there we go. Now we can see it.
Okay. Well, let me put it back in presentation mode and see, do you see the man and the robot?
Yes, now we do.
Okay. I don't know. But now when we think about potentially having the man and the robot in the plant, maybe while the man is taking his 5-minute stretch break or his daily nap, the robot is actually out in the facility collecting air samples, taking noise readings, collecting other information about the equipment, the tools, and the resources. Maybe in a more hospital type setting or a aircraft manufacturing setting, maybe that robot dog, while the man is out doing whatever else he does, is coordinating and doing quality inspections and making some of those other checks. So while this isn't maybe entirely the asset of the future and what that looks like, there is the potential that there's going to be a good mix of some of this in that space. So I hope it's updated to the next slide. Please let me know if it didn't. So how are we going to get to this future? I think
it didn't move again. Sorry, it didn't move again.
It's not okay. We'll just not worry about presentation mode then.
Okay, there you go.
I'm not sure what the challenge is. So when we think about how we're going to get to this future, the reduction in human intervention, the hands-off approach, is really driven by a number of things. And these are the issues that come up in conversations that I have with people in different industries, other human factors practitioners. Some of it's reflected in the literature around the ideas about innovation. Some of them I think are not in the same way. And so I wanted to talk about these a little bit. As far as instrumentation, the evolution of high reliability, cost-effective instrumentation is moving very quickly. And so while we don't want to instrument everything in a facility or in a production space, there is the potential to use higher quality, higher reliability instrumentation of different kinds in different ways than we currently use them today to get the information that we need. It may be product count, it may be something about process flows, but the instrumentation has definitely made advances that we can then feed back into our data analysis, our methodologies, our modeling. And of course, this is going to have an impact on the physical environment as well as workloads and all of those things. Cameras, drones, and things like the dogs that expand our vision, specifically in the space around vision, but certainly other capabilities as well. One of the things that we talk about in so many workspaces is having good situational awareness. And for a lot of us who are very visual, that means really seeing and understanding what's happening in the space. So if we have a person sitting in one room who can see 50 cameras or 10 drones that are moving around a warehouse or a plant, that potentially allows that individual to develop a stronger set of situational awareness paradigms about the work that they're doing than if they had to actually go out and physically walk all of those spaces. So especially from the perspective of situational awareness, which is just understanding what's happening now so that we can predict into the short-term future and the longer-term future. When we think about that, there's a lot of exciting spaces and information that will help us to move into that future state. Thinking about analyzer technology, different people, analyzer means different things to them. So it can be analysis of quality information. It can be analysis of count or manufacturing. It can even be analysis of product flow if we have a liquid or a gas product. But we've seen significant improvements in analyzer technology, a lot of it around reducing the space that those analyzers take in our workspaces, integrating different technologies, including cameras. And so there's a lot of opportunity there for us to make a step forward in getting better information, higher quality information, more real time. Valve actuators is something that comes up a lot when you talk to people who work in process industries or who are involved in pipeline or other energy transfer systems. Valve actuators have historically been fairly large, sometimes cumbersome. Some of them are not as reliable as we would like them to be, and we're seeing improvements in that technology. So why is that important? Well, if I have a valve actuator and I don't have to send a person out to physically manipulate a flow system, then that is protecting that person from hazards. It's keeping them in a space where they can move on to the next task more quickly, and it's potentially reducing the physical exertions that they have to conduct as part of their daily activities. So also a really interesting space. Remote start and stop is something that we've had for a long time. I think most people have seen start-stop buttons on everything from amusement rides to equipment that they have in their own homes. But automated start-stop is something that doesn't exist in every industry. And so the idea of being able to do that in certain industries where maybe we're currently not allowed to for regulatory reasons, for process safety reasons, for personal safety reasons. As we integrate and move forward, there's actually some industries that are very excited about the potential of getting remote start-stop. There's also certainly advances in process automation as we move toward more automated systems. There's more demand for the control systems that run those and how they evolve, how they become more user-centric, which of course is really important. And the data historians that we have in different types of industries. So some of our data historians are very evolved and capture millions of data points at every moment almost. Other data historians are currently more manual, and while we're keeping track of input and output, quality information, those types of details, it's not automated, and so it can tend to lag a lot, which is not helpful if we're trying to optimize some of our solutions. So advances in data historians, not only to move toward optimization, but also they're becoming smarter like everything else. And so now they're able to provide us with some information that maybe we were having to go to another application to actually mine that data. Those spaces are evolving. Certainly the application of data analytics is something that we expect to boom in the future, whether it's complex data analytics to things like keeping track of more data and specific KPIs, those types of things, key performance indicators around count, quality, volume, defects. As we create more of that data, the analytics will come with it. Some of them will be very complex, some of them will be simple, but we need people who are going to understand how to do them, how to apply them, and how to interpret them as we move our businesses forward. And last but not least is artificial intelligence. You know, some people would say it's the elephant in the room. Depends on, you know, is it a good elephant or a bad elephant? But it's certainly something there that's taking up a lot of space in conversation on people's minds. So how will artificial intelligence impact all of the things in this list and things far beyond it? We don't know. There's certainly a lot of potential. So we have to see. The short story on artificial intelligence, though, is, and automation in general, that I think it's not going to replace the person in our manufacturing, production, banking, medical operations. I mean, practically any industry that you think about, aviation, I don't think the people are going away. So what does that mean? That means that we need to make sure that we are accommodating them in the facilities that exist today and that will exist tomorrow. So what do these new assets look like? I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about some of the details of what that might look like. So remotely controlled, we've talked about that a bit. The idea that maybe we have people sitting outside of the facility, whether it's a warehousing operation, a discrete production facility, or even a continuous production facility. Maybe they're just outside the plant walls, maybe they're just outside the perimeter of business, maybe they're sitting somewhere else in the United States, maybe they're sitting somewhere else in the world. But the idea that people will actually have to be physically co-located is quickly, I think, going to become something that moves away, that we move away from. We're even seeing it today, and I think it'll just accelerate over time. One of the other things that's been talked about a lot by human factors folks in particular is this idea that we would move toward campaign style maintenance. So the idea that we will send in a group of skilled and knowledgeable people with all the appropriate resources to go in and work very intensely for a very short period of time to restore, refresh, repair equipment or systems and bring them to current technologies, align them with other developments that are happening within the asset. But the idea is high intensity, short duration work. So what does that mean from a human factors perspective? If we have a lot of people in potentially a smaller space trying to get a lot done, it has an impact on layout. It has an impact on how we do the work, timing, fatigue risk, all of those different challenges. And then we talked a little bit earlier about surveilled by cameras, drones, robot observers. Again, taking the person potentially out of the space, but providing them with more information than they had when they were potentially out there walking around in the hospital on the production floor. So the work is potentially more analytical and data-driven, more problem solving, and less the day-to-day run and maintain, which would be handled by the system itself, which is great because that potentially reduces our health hazards and our physical work. So hopefully, as we look at the hierarchy of controls and we think about the idea of eliminate, hopefully we'll be able to eliminate a lot of exposures, which is great from an IH perspective, from a human factors perspective, from a medicine perspective, just across the board. The physical work reduction is also something really interesting. There are lots of different ideas about what the workforce will look like in the future demographically, as well as what they're willing and able to do. And so potentially by reducing the physical work that actually happens in the field, we bring more people into our workforce pools. So it's a really interesting idea, at least I think. When we talk about the workplace, there's this idea that we might consolidate into larger industrial sites. So this is for a number of reasons. One, commercial real estate can be very expensive, especially the commercial real estate that we would need to support these types of production facilities, manufacturing. Hospitals, medical, and even some of the banking production is probably still going to stay out more in the communities where they're closer to their target audience. But there are a lot of things that we can bring together, move potentially to larger tracts of land. So if we consolidate these things, they have economies of scale in delivery, production, economies of scale that can potentially come from sharing spares, sharing stores. From a people perspective and a human factors perspective, it allows us to create consistency. It allows in processes and procedures. It also allows us to be really thoughtful about how we provide accessibility, workspace. There's some things that we'll talk about a little later about lighting, noise, and some of the spaces where human factors and industrial hygiene overlap. But there's potentially this idea of consolidating into larger industrial sites that have less impact on communities because they could be pushed a bit further out. Smaller footprints is also something that people are very excited about as we think about this. It goes back to that campaign style maintenance. So if we only require a small group of people to go in and do very targeted work on a very targeted system, that potentially has an impact on how we lay our facilities out. And so if we have a smaller footprint that is taller and we're making use of the vertical space more, there are opportunities to reduce light pollution and noise pollution because we can contain those things within our structures. We can also provide, since it's going to be campaign style maintenance, temporary access from the exterior of structures that will give us all the space that we need to access from that perimeter with potentially a limited set of access and egress on an interior kind of grid designed facility. So we can integrate materials handling, we can integrate some of the components that we need to cross over between systems. So there's a lot of potential there with a smaller, taller footprint. And then, of course, we've talked about instrumentation and automation. As we see instrumentation and automation increase, that potentially allows us to pull people back. So the workplace then becomes more of an office environment. So for a lot of our folks who work in production, manufacturing, process type industries, their workplace is actually in the plant or the facility. Now, as we move into this space, potentially they're moving into an office environment where it's climate controlled, where we can manipulate light, noise, and all the good things that make us comfortable. But there will be those times of short duration, high intensity in the field. Again, we can better manage those, especially as I look outside and think about how warm it's getting. Heat stress can potentially be really well managed in those circumstances because we know how long we're going to be there. We can put in air movers, we can take rest cycles. The same thing for our folks who are up north where it gets particularly cold in the winter and we need to manage their thermal stress as well, just in the opposite direction. Even those office spaces are going to be really controlled and automated. This will help with potentially energy conservation, some of the other things that have those longer term greenhouse impacts. And then we also think about the data in the workplace. There's going to be a ton of data. And well, we talked a little bit already about the structures and the common work volumes. So I think the spaces that we build in the future will actually look very different. And there is that opportunity now to make sure that people are thinking about the user and the people who will be in the spaces, even though they're not there often. How do we make sure that they can be safe when they are there? The last part of kind of that triad is thinking about the worker. So in the future, the idea is that it's going to be a technical worker who has a good background in analytics, potentially also in probability theory, but also still has the ability to go out and do the electromechanical work. So potentially thinking about how do we move into that space, because the technologies and our ability to do these things will get here long before we have all of the brand new shiny facilities for them to work in. So thinking about data analytics, probability theory, how do we teach that? What do we need to teach exactly? We don't need to make everyone a PhD in probability theory, but we do need to identify what's going to be useful for us as organizations in looking to optimize our features. We talked a little bit about working remotely. I think there's some interesting aspects of that. You may have someone who sits on the Gulf Coast and supports the Gulf Coast region. You may have someone who sits in Nebraska and supports all of the United States. You may be more reliant upon technical specialists who come from different organizations that manufacture the conveying systems and the pumps and the processors who come in ad hoc to support us in doing different campaign style maintenance. So physically, people could be anywhere. What are the impacts of that? We'll talk about that a little bit, but that has an impact too, because what spaces do they need? Is work from home really a long-term solution for a lot of industries? There's a lot of conversation around that. It's good for some, maybe not good for all of them. So when we think about workspaces, how do we manage that? And we were talking a little earlier in our conversations today about ergonomics in the workplace, ergonomics at home. If we're now all working from home, what does that mean we need to do? What are the responsibilities of organizations to support that? The physical requirements can also potentially go down for folks if we have the ability to integrate materials handling and some of the other things that make our work challenging. Again, good accessibility is a huge part of that. So the physical capability piece can also potentially change in some very positive ways for our workforce. So as far as the hardware and the physical workspace, I have some notes that I want to grab real quick to make sure that I hit all my points. When we think about rotating equipment, this is likely in many scenarios to become about a temporary replacement, potentially a hot swap, instead of repairing in place, which is what a lot of our facilities do now. So as we become potentially taller, skinnier, and we have better access, we may be going in and removing failed equipment or removing problematic equipment and putting in a replacement that's ready to go to reduce our downtime, increase our production, increase our profits in the end. And so there are lots of things that go with that. So we have to have the proper supports for the systems. We have to have the right materials handling to allow us to do that. We have to have the right skills for the people who go out and remove these pieces of equipment, especially the larger rotating systems. For the valves, as we think about these, we talked a little bit about the actuators and how that technology is allowing them to become smaller and potentially easier to exchange out. That's definitely going to be an opportunity. The valves themselves, depending on the industry that you're in, are potentially becoming smaller because we're able to better control and meter product. Even when you get into wafer manufacturing and things like that, airflow can now be really carefully controlled to allow us to do those quality control activities. So the other thing that we think about with valves is the trim. So we talk about how they're built, and the trim affects how they flow. It affects the noise. And so as we move into this space where we're becoming better at managing all of those things, the trim and the design of valves itself is potentially going to improve. Metallurgy is probably not going to change very much, and metallurgy is what drives a lot of the size of most valves or the material of construction. But I think there's a lot of opportunity around valves, and there's a lot of work from a human factors perspective associated with valves in all types of industries. Instrumentation, we've mentioned before. The point that I wanted to make around instrumentation is, as we evolve in this space, we're going to learn better how to use instrumentation. I was talking with someone recently, and he pointed out that during the Apollo 13 mission, they had a much, much smaller set of data when that mission was coming home than when it went up. And data that they thought that they needed to make good decisions and to control the return to Earth, turned out they could find other ways to make those decisions. They could find other ways to infer some of that data. And so I think as we look to reduce footprint, as we look to be really smart about how we collect and process our data, I think instruments are going to be a huge part of that, not only putting more out there, but potentially putting the right instrumentation out there and thinking more about how we use that. Piping, different types of systems for conveyance. The big thing there, I think, is that as we look at better and more thoughtful design, we can reduce those systems. So we can reduce the linear feet of pipe. We can reduce the space that's necessary for conveying. That reduce costs, that reduce reduces weight, that speeds up processes. It also, as a human factors practitioner, I find pipe tends to end up in the place I don't want it to be. And so the idea of reducing piping, conduit, conveyance, all of that is appealing from that perspective. Thinking about tools, I think there will be a focus more on tools because we have so many things in, particularly when I think about discrete manufacturing, that are there for the occasional use. And if we're doing campaign maintenance, we can go out and we can bring those tools with us. They don't have to be integrated into process. That will increase slightly our materials handling, but hopefully we have the facilities in place to manage the materials handling better than we do in a lot of our facilities now. And so I think there's definitely an advantage there. The last thing on my list is structures. And so as we change, we talked about them being potentially more co-located, potentially taller, a bit skinnier. That will have an impact on how they're designed, the materials of design. It will have an impact on the subterranean civil work. So will we need to go deeper in the earth to pour pilings and foundations? What environmental impacts will that have? And again, the idea that we need to make sure that we preserve space for people to work. So how do we make sure that we're driving that message home as the basic space required for our structures is developed? So we talked about operations and the equipment and those types of things, but what does that mean for maintenance? So we talked about campaign maintenance. In a linear facility design, potentially a tall, skinny grid stacked up several layers, it does have the potential to reduce plant noise on a regular basis because we can contain that. It also has the potential to reduce light pollution, again, because we can focus the lighting in the spaces that we need it to be when we need people there. This is also a potential for the folks who are in the facilities. So if we know and it is planned when people will be there and where they're going, we can look at other things in the plant and potentially reduce the overall exposure in the facility, as well as reducing their individual exposures when they're working on particular pieces of equipment or working in particular units. Similar with the lighting, we can be a lot more targeted, use task lighting that is really fit for the task, that is fit for the group, and doesn't potentially have an impact on larger environments. Some of the other technologies that we might be using as far as infrared or other things to help us with gathering information. And then the last thing about this tall, skinny stack of matrices is increased work at heights. And a lot of people get very concerned when we talk about work at heights. I'm one of them, but I think that one of the opportunities that we will see that is a challenge that's turned into a benefit is that if this is the approach that we have to structures and maintenance, then we will have the right equipment in place, we will have the proper training, we will have the right approaches to working at heights. For me personally, the biggest challenge around work at heights is when people are outside of those guardrails, when they're in the transitional spaces, whether it's stairs or ladders. So we can manage that better using temporary elevators. We can build scaffold decks and other temporary decks that can be relocated and put in the right places so that we give people the room that they need, even though it's at height. If we manage well how they get there and put guardrails around everything so that they're safe, I think this is really going to be an opportunity, not as much of a negative. Thinking about that campaign style maintenance, I talked a little bit about the increased use of tools that will have lots of advantages, reduction in equipment, but it's also going to give the folks who go out to do that maintenance a better feel for the work, and it will allow them to better understand as they're breaking things apart. They'll have those opportunities to see the details that now we're not potentially going to see on a day-to-day basis when folks are not out in the units, out on the plant floors, out in the warehouses. A little bit about the common spares. I think this is a fantastic opportunity because it's going to allow us to standardize the work the processes, the procedures, the knowledge base that people need, standardize the tools so that we know if someone is going out to replace a particular piece of equipment, we're going to have a really strong understanding of what the people need and what they're going to do and how they're going to do it safely. So I think there's, in addition to the financial and the storing and warehousing cost, I think there's some really good benefit there. I think one of the other things, and I hear this especially from service providers, is that they anticipate a much stronger relationship in the future. So if we are pulling out equipment to send it out and not necessarily repair it in place, which we do for some equipment in some industries, that's going to build that bond with our service providers. They're going to be much more aware of the equipment that we have, what our facilities look like, how they run, and how we can most effectively work together to reduce the downtime for equipment and facilities. So there's a huge opportunity there. Not only do those service providers typically have knowledge and skills and information that internally we don't, but now there's that opportunity to see it transition, because maybe they're sending more people into our plants and warehouses. Maybe we're sending more people out to learn how to do this work so that we can understand better how to predict for failures. So I think there's a lot of really exciting stuff in the maintenance space as well. So when we look back at the 5 parts of human factors, the 5 factors, we talked about the work, we've talked about the equipment, we've talked about the people. I just wanted to briefly mention the environment and the organization. So certainly from an environmental perspective, we've talked about lighting, more task-specific lighting. We've talked about ways to make changes in elevation. Air movers is one I haven't touched on. I don't just mean the big blowers that we tend to think of in certain industries for moving air. As people are no longer inhabiting certain environments on a regular basis, or maybe not at all, we can think about air movement versus HVAC. So maybe there are circumstances where we currently have HVAC because there are people working in the environment. I think about warehouses in particular for this, where we have high levels of HVAC primarily for personnel comfort, that we can potentially still maintain our products in that warehouse with a lower, higher levels of humidity, higher temperatures, or potentially lower temperatures, depending on where you are, what time of year. So we can look at the potential to use air movers or ventilation in a different mix with HVAC. So there are exposure potentials that are reduced with that. There's certainly cost savings when we think about maintaining that equipment. So I think that's a really interesting space that we'll be able to investigate as we move into this future state. Environmental protections are certainly going to be a place for evolution. If we can move our production and manufacturing spaces out, that's going to have a huge impact on communities where we can remove some of the things that are negative about those facilities from the places where people live, work, and play, and improve upon air quality and some of those other things that might be impacted by not only the facility, but the traffic of employees and deliveries and receipts and the things that go out from them. Noise, we talked about earlier, we can potentially contain, potentially remove from communities. And another interesting one that I personally experienced recently was the return of nature. I recently had the opportunity to visit a facility that is not currently manned. It's doing some downtime, probably for a year or so. And it was amazing how quickly nature was moving back in. So not only plant life, which comes back pretty quickly, and vines can come back with a lot of tenacity, but we also started to see insects in places that we had not seen before. We saw a lot more wildlife, so the rabbits, the coyotes, lots of birds. And so this is something that we have to think about. If we only have, the person and the dog, what does that mean for wildlife that may potentially move back in? If they're just roaming around and they don't stay very long, that's maybe not a problem. But if We have birds nesting in openings under vessels or on the tops of tanks, in the rafters of warehouses. Birds like to leave things behind that are potentially harmful to human beings, not only slip, trip, fall wise, but potentially disease wise. And so the same things with other animals that live out in the environment. So other things will come to be there. And how are we going to manage that? What does that need to look like? Organizationally, if we think about smaller staffs that are working independently, what is that going to mean for our organizational culture? Also, if they're working remotely, how do we build teams? If you have one person on the East Coast, one person on the West Coast, one person in Europe, and maybe only that one person that's actually at the location for most of the time. We're going to have different needs for communication when we think about it. So not everybody reads emails. I think we all can testify to that. But the communications are going to be different. There's going to be a lot more data that's passed back and forth that has to be turned into information. So how are we going to communicate the data versus the information? What's most important for different people at different times? How are we even going to communicate basic things like the need to be vigilant around safety? When we think about team building is really foundational for good communication. How do we do that when people are only maybe together every 3 years for a campaign maintenance event? Processes and procedures are going to come much, much more important. We already know that about 33% of incidents in industry at large are related to insufficient or unavailable procedures. Now, when we only do something every 5 years, every 10 years, how critical does it become that that procedure was really well documented the last time, that any changes that happen as equipment's been updated or technologies have advanced, how are we going to make sure that we're keeping those really crisp? And of course, the processes that help us to manage the work that we do at a larger scale. Ways of working are also going to change, primarily associated with the ideas around communication and remote location. Also going back to that partnership with service providers and third parties, but there's a lot that's going to change from an organizational perspective. It's not just reducing headcount. The last part is around the individual themselves. So I know personally when the pandemic hit, it was really easy for me to stay at my computer for a very, very long period of time before realizing that the day had passed and I was well past 8-10 hours for my day. As we see people move from the field more into the office spaces and the analytical spaces, how are we going to help to develop those good boundaries? How are we going to identify? First, we have to identify an employee value proposition, and then how do we make that go? And employee retention is also going to look different. If you talk to HR professionals, they talk about the average tenure for someone in an organization being 3 years as we move into the future. We won't see the operators and the maintainers in our plants and in our production facilities who've been there for 25 years and can tell you about, the last time that we had to maintain this or the last time we had to change this out. That organizational knowledge is likely not going to be something that is part of our culture in the future. And when we do things very infrequently, how are we going to maintain that knowledge and bring it forward? So a lot of things in that space as well. So briefly, because I think I've covered a lot of the topics already, when we think about the challenges, I think personally, and really talking to a lot of people who work in industries that are long standing, we have this challenge of we're building new facilities. And we have facilities that have been around since the early 1900s. So how do we balance working in those two very different environments? How do we bring existing assets into the future, but not neglect all of the opportunities for the newer assets? Another big question, and this is one that I think the IEH community is also really aware of, is how are we going to manage the regulations that are currently on the books? So a lot of folks may remember when OSHA updated for the first time, basically ever, the 1910.20 on through section, the basic OSHA requirements. That had not ever happened large scale like it did in 2016. We're going to have to find ways to make incremental change or significant change in regulation to support these different types of organizations that work in different ways. And so I think that's also a big concern for a lot of people. I'm just going to highlight a few of the challenges. These are questions that when we sit down and talk in different communities that are coming up over and over again. So I wanted to share some of them with you around the work itself for the existing assets, because again, the challenges are going to be different. How can we optimize the information that we have already into better solutions? And then what does that mean for the work itself? What new software and hardware are we going to need to support the philosophies that we have going forward? I'm concerned in a lot of ways from a hardware perspective, because again, I'm really interested in making sure that people can get to the places that they work and work safely. I think a lot of folks in the human factor space are really concerned about that right now. But from a software perspective as well, there is a lot of variability in software development. Some of it is really in tune to user needs. Some of it is not. Some of it is very process driven and not really focused on the individual. So we need to balance that for our newer assets. As we move away from potentially a 24/7 scheme into consolidated work hours, what is that going to look like? How do we choose that work that doesn't have to happen at night anymore? How can we choose work scheduling so that it reflects the needs and not necessarily our historical approaches to things? And then how much work and how often will this occur in the field? I talked about this idea of campaign style maintenance. That's going to work for some organizations. It's going to work for some industries, not necessarily for all of them. So how will those philosophies break out? And how will we see maintenance when it becomes less of a day-to-day thing and more of an occasional thing? How will we see those philosophies develop? As far as equipment, when we think about the additional instrumentation and equipment for our existing assets, how are we going to get that into the space? Are we going to be able to take things out? I'm hoping that that's part of the solution, is to be really smart about what we use and potentially take out things that we don't. Another thing is, how do we talk about the benefits in terms of risk and exposure and help the business to quantify them? Because I think when we think about all of this innovation, everything comes with a cost, and it comes at a cost in every perspective. So a cost for safety, a cost for bottom line dollars, a cost for production, a cost for people. How can we help them to quantify and identify those risks, communicate them in a way that the value is truly recognized? For our new assets, it's really about, in my mind, optimizing layout, optimizing how we design the facilities, thinking about how we're going to implement our maintenance philosophies, what that operational philosophy is going to look like. How can we best support people in developing good situational awareness and giving them the data, the tools, and the resources that they need to do their work? The other thing is, how will regulation reflect these low occupancy workspaces? There are a lot of requirements from the OSHA perspective, from a PSM perspective, from an environmental perspective, that really have underlying the fact that we have people that are regularly present in fairly large numbers. And so how is that regulation going to change? How can we influence, particularly around regulation that is specific to different industries? How can we influence to reflect the things that we still think we need to keep people safe versus the things that maybe will be a little different? Environmentally, what can we change? Potentially, there is a huge array of things that we can do that will have environmental impacts, not only for the people in the workplace, but for our larger communities. It's really, I think, going to depend on how we optimize the existing sites. So can we potentially, if we can get smaller, move toward the center of our footprints and give ourselves more buffer space to the communities and the existing folks around us? I think we also have to think about what hazards are being created in a specific resourcing model. So having folks go out and do different things. To me, a lot of the hazards are the things that we know exist, but because people will not be doing the work on a regular basis, they won't have the appreciation for them. And so you can tell someone that there's a potential exposure to a chemical or to an environmental concern, like a contact type situation. If they haven't had that experience, if they're not familiar with the system, it may not be considered as big a hazard as we know it is from a professional perspective. So I think in our existing assets, that's going to be an opportunity. For the new assets, again, as the environmental space changes, how do we influence EPA? How do we influence some of our state and local environmental organizations to understand what we're trying to do and how there are improvements that we can make that will be easy and others will still be hard? And around the impacts to our environment and the community. If we go in with a new asset, traditionally there have been a lot of concerns from communities wanting to understand impacts. How are we going to communicate that it's not what they might have thought of from 30, 50 years ago, that this is something different? And we can talk about lighting levels and we can talk about noise levels because a lot of us have that experience and know what 1 lux looks like versus 100 lux and knows what 100 dBA sounds like versus 10 dBA. But how do we communicate that to a community who potentially has some ideas that are not really kind to us in mind? Organizationally, this is our last one. The roles, what roles are going to change? What work is going to be eliminated and moved into more of an automated space? How are those changes and other changes going to impact our cultures? For our new assets, what competency, skills, experience, and capabilities do we need from our workforce? And how are we going to manage those critical processes and procedures, which are going to become all the more important as the maintenance criteria potentially draw those activities out further and further apart? Oh, doesn't want to work for me. The people challenges, how are we going to train people? What is the organizational legacy going to look like for our existing assets, for our new assets, communication and capabilities like we talked about before? So I think I'm doing okay on time. I wanted to talk briefly about problem-solving approaches because there are lots of challenges, there are lots of opportunities out there. I think it's always good to remember that we have good tools that we can use to start thinking about these things and developing approaches. I have 4 that I wanted to highlight. There's that old joke that if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Well, I think from a human factors perspective, I have 5 tools, and I feel like those 5 tools can address so many of the challenges that I run into. 4 of the tools are listed here: hierarchical task analysis, tools and equipment analysis, human reliability, and role analysis. And I wanted to just briefly, if you're not familiar with these, provide you with just a little bit of insight. Hierarchical task analysis is really exactly what you would think it is. It's starting with your outcome or your goal and breaking it down subsequently to higher levels of granularity until you really understand everything that has to happen for you to get to your end goal or accomplish the production of your product or movement of your inventories. Once you understand that, we can put together information as far as knowledge, skills, and experience, equipment, the time that's required, all the things that help us to understand better what the work is. And so this is particularly helpful when we are trying to understand work and the work is changing. And so I think hierarchical task analysis will be very helpful. The graphic here is from a paper by Bob Fields around THEA, which is a human reliability methodology that we'll talk about. But just to give you an idea that hierarchical task analysis also flows into some of these other tools because it's just such a fantastic foundational piece. When we think about tools and equipment analysis, what I have shown for you here is actually the materials handling piece of it. It starts before this when we look at what the equipment is, what its requirements are for operations, for maintenance, for when we don't need to touch it at all, what do we need to provide, what are the space requirements, what are the power, air, all those other consumption requirements, and then how do we actually interact with it. And so this is from a human factors perspective, how do we get the space around it that we need, how do we provide the appropriate labeling, hazard warning signage that makes it safe to work on that equipment, and similarly the tools that we need to work on the equipment or to work in the environment. We identify all of those different components, and then particularly if we're moving to this more campaign style approach, we have to think about how we're going to move all of this around. I'm also very concerned about materials handling because I don't want people throwing out shoulders and backs and all the other things that can sometimes happen when we're not super concerned about field ergonomics. So a materials handling study starts with a large piece of equipment or a system and breaks it down. We look at weight, size, we think about how we're going to move it, we think about how we're going to lift it, where it's going to go, and then we think about the path along the way. How can we make sure that we're keeping people safe as they do the work and as well as the folks who are working around that? So do we need solid plate on the path of travel to make sure that we can distribute those loads better across a foundation? Or do we need a jig crane to make sure that we have the appropriate lifting capacity? So those studies are also, I think, really important as we're looking particularly toward the retrofits of facilities, and we look at different ways to address maintenance and approach maintenance. Human reliability analysis is very similar to equipment analysis, if you're familiar with that. Basically, we're trying to get to a number that tells us the probability of failure. There are many, many methodologies in the human factor space to address this. Some of them are more tailored for different industries than others. There are some that are very generic and I think very powerful, but the idea is that you start by understanding the work, or you start with the procedure, you break it down and you understand what the requirements are, where your hazards are, where your opportunities are, you identify mitigations or improvements, and then we can take it from that qualitative step to a further quantitative step and actually assign those probabilities. And there is some regulation in some parts of the world that is moving toward this more probabilistic approach, potentially with the idea that they marry it from a regulatory perspective as well as from an industry perspective with machine reliability and try to get the idea or the concept for the system reliability. We know that the human is likely the least reliable part of that system. That doesn't mean that we need to throw the human out. It just means that we need to do everything we can to support the human in being the most reliable and effective that they can be. A role analysis is a great tool when we start to think about people. So not only do we have to put roles together, but potentially we'll be looking to take roles apart and reconfigure them in different ways. The role analysis is about thinking about our high-level goals for a role and breaking it down. So situational awareness, I think I've mentioned several times before, very important from my perspective. So you start with this major responsibility or task, you break it down into component tasks, and you identify knowledge, skill, and experience, capabilities, time, where people have to be to do these things, and also the information and data that they need to get it done. Physical resources are also important, but they tend to tie back more to location. And so what this allows us to do is understand what we are asking of an individual in a role. Is it appropriate? is it the right skill set that is required for this role, that we're asking them to then have those same skills for the task? As we eliminate tasks from roles because they move into automated or AI systems for addressing them, how do we cross these lines out in different role analyses and combine them in different ways? We have to be very careful that we don't just say, hey, a technician can take these other 3 things on. Do technicians currently, and will they in the future, have the right experiences, have the right resources, have the right knowledge to do that work? So I think this is also something that we're going to have to look at very carefully. Maybe not something that across many industries we do really well right now. And the last tool that was not on that list, but I think is just an incredibly powerful one, is a requirements analysis. And this is also not any kind of rocket science. A requirements analysis is basically sitting down and looking at your activities and then thinking about the processes that make up the activity and then what requirements there are for each of those things to happen. So it's similar to a hierarchical task analysis, but at a higher level. And it helps us to identify the requirements, and then we can go out and find the solutions and the designs and the tools and equipment and resources without maybe biasing ourselves in the beginning of the process. So in summary, I know that was a lot, and I hope that you'll go back and look at some of those ideas and things in the future. The thing is, we don't know what the future is going to hold. We don't know how fast it's going to come. We don't know what it's actually going to end up looking like. We do know that every day there's new innovation and discovery, and that is constantly changing how we think about the world, how we think about work, how we think about what products we will need in the future. Will we move away from disposable type items and go back to some of the more permanent items that are reused? And so that changes some of our philosophies. From an energy perspective, will we change the sources of energy that we use? That will all impact where we go in the future. But I think for now, the message is, at least for the foreseeable future, we need to consider the human in anything that we produce, manufacture, move, send out into the world, because the human is the one thing that is going to be a constant, at least for the foreseeable future. And so now I want to send you all out into the future with lots of good things to think about. Primarily, just don't forget that people need space to be. They need good data and information to make good decisions. And so I'll open it up to questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Eileen. That was great. Do we have any questions out there? I guess I'll go first. I have a question. I was curious, when you were talking about the worker study that they were only staying at jobs now for around 3 years versus 25 or lifelong jobs, was there any reason, like explicit reason, that they said why, or what was the cause of that? And was there any kind of solution to that as well?
Yeah, so talking with folks in the human resources space, they believe that people will have multiple jobs where we might think about having a career, because there's a greater importance put on learning and development by the current younger generations. And so they are not necessarily looking for the same things long term that the current, we'll call them mature generations, are looking for. They're less interested in stability and predictability, and they seem to be more interested in the adventure and learning. So I think 3 years is pretty quick. I wouldn't be surprised if it turns out to be closer to 5 to 7, but we have to go with the data that they're giving us at this point.
For sure. Great, thank you. All right, hopefully everybody is back at this point. And now we have, last but not least, we have Alex Cardone as our last speaker today. He is working with the Department of Defense, He is a certified industrial hygienist who leads Air Force's premier industrial hygiene team. With a strong commitment to worker health and worker safety, he volunteers with organizations such as Worker Health Without Borders and AIHA's Noise Committee. And most recently, he's been asked to be a special guest speaker by AIHA to better prepare the presenters at the upcoming AIHA contest in 2024. He tailors an emphasis on continual professional development and strives to drive innovation and training in worker health. So take it away for us, Alex.
All right. Hey everybody. Can you hear me? Everything coming in all right?
It's a little quiet. I don't know if there's a way to turn up just a little bit.
I will see if I can. I might just have to get really close. Okay. Any of you that have worked with the government, you know that we have the most top-notch, state-of-the-line equipment. I believe I'm rocking like Windows 6, I believe. So this is going great. Please let me know if anything breaks up. I'm more than happy for criticisms as long as it's not my fault. Okay, but I'm very excited to be able to chat with you all. I'm sure that we possibly have crossed paths in the past, and I'm excited to be able to talk about really whenever it comes to ergonomics. One thing I really wanted to talk about was a concept that we've held very dear to us at my current location at Hill Air Force Base. We'll talk a little bit about the specifics that have kind of led us here, but it all has to do with the synergy or what we found, the overlapping materials that have allowed us to excel in our ergonomic evaluation program. And a lot of it had to do with how we've been able to gather similarities from our industrial hygiene monitoring program as well. We believe that this is something that really all of our career field, whether industrial hygienists or safety specialists, EHS professionals, there's a lot of current talents that are emphasized within our normal industrial hygiene type monitoring plans that can easily be able to reach into our ergonomics plans, which is often an overshadowed or overlooked element on how much it's emphasized, whether that be to background or really anything else. But I did want to be able to first go into just some initial questions. I would love to be able to just kind of understand as well, who am I speaking to? So just have two questions right here. So what industry are you currently affiliated with or have experience in? Feel free to just respond in the chat. And then I would also be able to love to be able to know what's your experience with ergonomic style evaluations, whether that be you've performed qualitative evaluations, you've performed quantitative evaluations, qualitative and quantitative, you've had just training or education on it, but you haven't performed anything, or you may think ergonomics is a town in Michigan. Just really trying to gauge kind of where you're at. So I see a few people already typing in. I also hope as well is that 3. That is fair, Dr. Sue. Thank you for that. My also hope is that I realize I am in between you guys and lunch. So hopefully it'll be not only entertaining, but we can also be able to learn something and get out on a reasonable time. Higher education, both types of evaluations, good. Academic university, performing qualitative, fantastic, a town in Michigan. That's also, I've heard it's related to that. I think I typed up that Wikipedia page this morning, actually, Joe. Higher ed, qualitative. Okay, fantastic. Feel free to keep on responding as well. This helps me as a presenter just so that I can better understand who am I talking to, how do I gauge and better understand some of this material. So I really appreciate your participation. If you have questions, don't feel like you have to wait until the end. Feel free. Already kind of reach them out as you're going along, and then we'll circle back to them. Oilfield, just a newbie to ergonomics, they'll have participated with those screening ergonomics. Fantastic. I don't know if I just said economics, but that's different. Okay, so Fantastic. Let's dive in a little bit more. So wanted to be able to just make sure that we all have a foundational background on one of the biggest challenges that at least we face at our organization, and I imagine we also encounter with other organizations, and that is OSHA's ergonomic, quote unquote, standard. So whenever we have to tackle or whenever looking at ergonomics, we can't really approach it in the same kind of firepower or the same kind of teeth that we have with other industrial hygiene type measures, whether that be noise or chemical exposures. One of the biggest things that those specific hazards have going for them is they have a specific regulatory guidance that is able to help back us up. We need to make these improvements because X, Y, and Z, legally, we have a responsibility. We do. However, it's a little looser whenever it comes to ergonomics, and it's kind of a situation that we're put in. There was a standard that was put forth, however, it was rejected in the early 2000s. And right now, if a corporation or an industry were to be cited for ergonomics, it typically falls underneath the general duty clause, which again states that we have to have a workplace that's free from recognized hazards that could cause likely death or physical harm. That does fit into the criteria. However, again, it's not very specific, and is based upon interpretation. It just gives us as occupational health professionals a little less teeth unless we have a lot of supervision and participation from our customers to be able to improve. But this is something that we're seeing nowadays that's a very big emphasis item. One of them specifically, I believe it's been probably the last 4 years, has been Amazon. If you have looked on the OSHA website at all, it looks like Amazon is referenced throughout it. They might as well be advertising on the OSHA website. They have been hammered and pinpointed in several states throughout the entire U.S., been cited for hundreds of thousands of dollars for just issues dealing with both ergonomic stressors or ergonomic conditions that are present, but actual ergonomic related injuries that are occurring within the workplace. This is something that OSHA does emphasize and look at, even though it does have that weird stipulation that there is not a specific standard that governs it. One of the biggest concerns that they have is, of course, MSDs, and those were talked to previously by the previous presenters as well. I won't go into that too much, but again, we're looking at some of the highest risk occupations that we may be dealing with, such as registered nurses, nursing assistants, firefighters, laborers. We often think of these individuals whenever we think about ergonomics or ergonomically stressful situations. However, there's a lot of other occupations that could also mirror similarly related occupational stresses. It's not just physical labor or highly intense and explosive movements that you might find in these three industries or these three related jobs, but even spaces such as truck drivers, maids, housekeepers, cleaners, production workers, stock clerks, order fillers. I'll tell you, I did DoorDash for a little while, and I don't think my back has been the same just from sitting in my car and staying still. All of these things, and that's what makes ergonomics such a very interesting element to really discuss and further look into and investigate as occupational health professionals, is that ergonomics are everywhere, and they can be impacted and stressed and I mean, honestly, for lack of a better word, they're ubiquitous like mold. It's constant and ever present. So with that being said, wanted to talk about some of the early benefits that we typically hear whenever it comes to an ergonomic hazard management system, that whether it be a private industry or the government industry, these are the typical things that we hear whenever it comes to the benefit of having an ergonomic-based program, that being reduced musculoskeletal disorders. So implementing ergonomic interventions, they can help reduce the incidence of MSDs, like back pain, repetitive strain injuries, or repetitive working tasks. Same thing, increased productivity. Ergonomic improvements often lead to more efficient work processes, and that's something that's sometimes harder to be able to actually characterize or explain to some of the organizations that we're reaching out to. especially if we're trying to do it proactively before there are any signs or symptoms that might show up. Same and very related to that is lower absenteeism and turnover that can be present. Through reducing workplace injuries and discomfort, ergonomic programs, they can contribute to employees being able to be at the company performing work much longer, as well as potentially reducing other financial savings, which is a later one, and having to do with increased health insurance costs or other lost time that might be there. Another item is improved employee morale and job satisfaction. This is something that, especially whenever we're looking at the government, typically we get a bad rap whenever it comes to morale and job satisfaction. I don't know why. I think it's the DMV. But improved employee morale. That's something we're going to be going into a little bit later on how and intense focus on ergonomic evaluations, how we go about them, has been able to further increase the participation that we have with our customers. And then as well, compliance and reduced legal risks that can come from it, as we can be able to see from Amazon or other companies that may be involved with various lawsuits or just other sorts of time now devoted management of risk, or I guess kind of legal confrontation. So substantial financial benefits is something that I wanted to be able to spend a little bit of time on, just because this is something that's very good for all of us to be able to again, keep in mind, keep in our back pocket, especially as we're communicating with other individuals, trying to get them on board for why ergonomics can easily have a great return on our investment. They can have substantial financial benefits, both from direct, so cost savings from reduced injuries. There was a study by the Washington State Department of Labor and Industries. They estimated that the savings of implementing an effective ergonomics program was that for about every $1 invested, you saved and returned about $100, which is, that's an easy estimate to be able to portray to our customers, to upper leadership who might be more focused on what is that return, what am I going to get out of any sort of investment into a new program or revamping any existing programs. Similarly, the Journal of Occupational and Environmental Medicine, they had found out that ergonomic interventions, they could be able to return roughly about a $3 to a $6 return on investment for every $1 invested. So again, it's highlighting that as far as actual interventions moving forward, most of that was seen from decreased absenteeism, lower turnover rates, just allowing the workers to be able to continue to do their job and to do what they do best, rather than just focusing on a reduction in MSDs. Other case studies that have been able to find out, so there's a large manufacturing company. It didn't specifically state who it was in this study. However, they estimated that there was an annual savings of about $1.5 million total, both having to do with fewer injuries, lower compensation claims, as well as that insurance cost, especially whenever it comes to the lower compensation claims, can really pay out a lot. And as well, improved productivity, possibly due to increased morale, or as well, we're keeping people on the floor, they can do and keep doing their job. There was also a logistics company that OSHA further investigated, and they had seen a 75% reduction in MSDs as they applied an intervention system for an ergonomic system. The return on investment that they saw was close to about $500,000. So again, highlighting, reiterated, there are some financial benefits that can be able to come from an ergonomics program. So if you were curious, is this effective, or will this help out our organization? It very well can, as long as it is actually implemented effectively. But alongside this, there are some difficulties that we have with this. And so difficulties with actually implementing any type of ergonomic program, or managing ergonomic programs as well. One of the biggest being that financial benefit. It does take money to be able to invest into certain projects, and as well, we're not blind to that, especially in our profession, where at the end of the day, a lot of industrial hygiene or occupational health, a lot of our return on investment is something that we'll see months or even years or decades down the line, we may not see it, the immediate return on investment at this moment. And so there is a capital that's put now so that we can invest into our future. Same thing, lack of training or decision on how to approach hazards or controls, whether that be from both occupational health specialists not being able to accurately evaluate or train or implement controls within their specific workplace. One of the biggest issues that we have is that very last bullet. Each problem, whenever it comes to ergonomics, this is one of probably the golden issue that we have. Each problem requires a unique solution. That's something that we typically don't find with some of the other hazards whenever it comes to chemical hazards, for example. One of the almost ubiquitous things we can do for an overexposure, well, a lot of the times we can just implement some sort of ventilation. That can usually be able to solve most of our issues. However, with ergonomics, it really depends on such a variety of factors, which further increases the difficulty of why ergonomics can have a harder time not only selling the point of why it's important, but how these things will financially benefit the organization. I wanted to be able to talk about Hill Air Force Base and our perspective really quick. We are actually very similar to a lot of private industry, despite us being associated with the government. So Hill Air Force Base, we have roughly about 28,000 employees on our base. We are a massive installation. So again, for as far as scope with that, we have both active duty and civilian members. We are a depot level base. So any fighter aircraft that the Air Force creates or maintains, that's basically us who maintains it. So we do the equivalent of whether it's an oil change for it, or we're completely ripping these aircraft apart to nuts and bolts and rebuilding it back together. There is a lot that we have to deal with, but one of the very unique things that we have on this base, and really it's almost all DoD or government affiliated installations, is we have a very unique population because our employees, our personnel, our customers that we're serving, most often, they're reaching close to about 40 to 50 years within service. So I really like the point that in private industry, a lot of what we're seeing is a high turnover rate of about 3 years. That's true to an extent in the government, especially on the DoD side, but we're actually seeing the other side where we're having a lot of individuals who stay within the certain organization or the certain types of jobs. A lot of it has to do with fulfilling their 20-year obligation as they were serving active duty, and they immediately turn around and go into civil service. That way, and then extending close to about another 20 or even 30 or 40 years and continually doing the exact same job throughout that entire time. In fact, I know of an individual, we actually sampled him yesterday for methylene chloride, but he is close to about 82 years old and he is still puttering around. But it's a very unique situation that we have where individuals, they don't leave. And as well, they typically stay with this. But that further emphasis on their long-term exposure, we'll also have a better, or a larger emphasis on ergonomics, as that has almost a longer, could have a longer latency period with some of these issues. The other thing that that's a further hurdle that we have to tackle. So not only is there not a specific OSHA standard that deals with ergonomics, but being part of the DoD, we are not vulnerable to OSHA fines. We have OSHA come onto our site roughly once a year, sometimes close to like 3 or 4. And there are times that a notice of violation is given, whether we feel it's warranted or not, conversations and such like that. However, at the end of the day, OSHA can't cite us, which one of their biggest, as far as motivating factors for private industry, is their citations of fines, as well as the negative remarks that they can not that they directly put on their OSHA website, but the reputation that can be associated with it. For the most part, that's not something that the Department of Defense necessarily cares about, but it's something that further can hamper how effective we are in communicating and stressing to our customers why ergonomics is important, as there is not that very direct driver. One of the positive things, it's not all negative, I swear, is that we also host, we're still trying to be able to validate this, but what we believe is the only certified professional ergonomist within the DoD. Fortunately, we actually have him here on site. Currently, there's only about 1,400 certified professional ergonomists in the world. You don't have to be a certified professional ergonomist to be able to do ergonomic evaluations. However, as far as having someone with that specific credential can be able to add further validity in the type of recommendations that we have. We as well have recently adopted an emphasis item in conducting ergonomic evaluations during every type of IH monitoring that we perform. Our base performs roughly about 250 chemical and noise related evaluations throughout the entire year. It's quite a few. And in addition to those, we almost double the amount of evaluations that we do to almost 400 to 500 because we perform ergonomic evaluations at the same time that we actually perform any other IH monitoring or even shop visit out in the field. And we've seen, and we will discuss a little bit later, why we kind of came to that, how we came to see that these things do coincide, and then as well discuss how that cohesion necessarily works and how we've been able to further emphasize that within our organization. So one of the things that I wanted to be able to highlight is, again, how did we discover these things, that they are intertwined, and how do they intertwine? So this is very, very simply industrial hygiene basics that every occupational health professional should be able to know, both technical knowledge and some soft skills that are acting in the background throughout this entire time. So technical knowledge being sampling trains, calibration, in-field observations, analytical methods, statistical analysis, reporting results. You need to have these hard skills in order to effectively do any type of industrial hygiene monitoring. It's not an exhaustive list. There's plenty more to it. However, this just gives a very good idea to it. However, there's also in the background these soft skills that further enhance our work, such as communication, scheduling, time and project management, analytical thinking, working independently, flexibility, how well we can be able to interact and work together, and as well as seek to be able to communicate both risk management, working with various different scheduling as far as for our customers, managing multiple projects and time-sensitive information orderly, as well as thinking about ideas complexly and being able to further deduce as far as sampling results that come in so that we can better recommend appropriate controls, as well as working independently. It's not just lone wolfing it. Do you have the resources to be able to do your job effectively and to find the answer if you don't know it? And then flexibility, don't worry, this isn't touching your toes, because I would probably fail that as well. But it more has to do with we're a constantly changing and dynamic workforce. We're very, very unique in that aspect of we're constantly changing and updating our practices. And so with industrial hygiene, in any sense, we have to have that flexibility. Very similar, if we were to be able to look at this the same thing with ergonomics, there's technical knowledge that needs to be in the background in order to effectively and appropriately assign controls, evaluate hazards, and perform an evaluation. So that technical knowledge or hard skills that we need to have some exposure and knowledge in anatomy and physiology, biomechanical analysis, in-field observations, assessment tools, physical and cognitive ergonomics. So that not only includes as far as how exactly lifting techniques, manual handling practices, how to be able to optimize both comfort and efficiency, but it's also having to have an emphasis on mental workload, attention, decision making. This also could be seen as that human-computer kind of interaction, user-defined design interface, or other sort of cognitive task analysis that may need to be performed. In addition to this is ergonomic solutions. How effectively can we be able to both design or work to improve work processes or existing or implement new engineering controls or training that may be effective. And again, this is all with the applying this information in a unique setting almost every single time. These soft skills, you'll notice though, are actually the exact same. All of them demand the exact same amounts of communication, scheduling, project management that we have, which makes sense as ergonomics is a division or a branch of industrial hygiene monitoring. However, in addition to ergonomics, there is an even greater emphasis that we have on this soft skill, which is customer service. Especially, one thing that we had identified is that industrial hygiene, noise, chemical monitoring, even just a hazard evaluation, it has elements of customer service. However, the greatest emphasis that it has on is through ergonomic evaluations. Customer service, that is our ability to be able to understand people, their thoughts, their backgrounds, their unique situations. And because of the uniqueness that ergonomic controls demand, customer service is one of the largest soft skills that we have to be able to have whenever it comes to performing evaluations and also implementing effective controls, because it requires that uniqueness. And customer service is all about discovering and finding that uniqueness as well. And so I did have a video. I'm going to actually forgo this. I had added this afterwards. If you would like a copy of these slides, just let me know. I'm more than willing to be able to provide this, and there's a link there. I think it's a great example of one of the principles that I'm going to be issuing and talking about here in a little bit as well. But we're going to forgo that right now just to make sure everybody can be able to get to lunch at a reasonable hour as well. So further discussing into the synergy of ergonomic and IH monitoring. Again, how do they meld together? One thing we found was that there was an overlapping of skills in the in-field observations, both that technical hard skill and then almost in every soft skill that is needed in order for us to effectively do our job as an occupational health specialist. But especially with that hard skill. Again, almost all the hard skills are unique to the type of monitoring that's performed. However, the one that was cross-referenced between both actually had to do with in-field observations. How we approach observing or understanding, analyzing hazard. How we go about actually evaluating the hazard at hand. We had gained inspiration from one of the tools that NIOSH actually puts together, which is the health hazard evaluation. If you're not familiar with health hazard evaluations, they are a very intense study about one specific aspect, whether that be a chemical aspect or a company aspect or a specific process, or more commonly, it's a specific process with a very specific hazard that's present. They take a really all hazards approach whenever they come in. So a team comes in and they perform observations of a process that is being conducted. They mark down every single hazard that's there, taking an all hazard approach. And then at the end of the entire analysis, a very thorough document is provided to the organization and released publicly that goes into every hazard that has been associated with that task and with that process. We had discovered this a few years ago, that these were even available and that they were there. And as we read them, we loved that all hazard approach whenever it comes to conducting any sort of interaction that we have with a customer. And so we try to be able to see what are the ways that we can be able to implement this same concept and this same look. That led us to being able to look at this overlapping skills between ergonomics and every single other type of industrial hygiene monitoring method that we have. And it all centered around not setting blinders on the analyte of interest that we have. One of the things that's our biggest hazard that we have currently on our base is hexavalent chromium. In the aerospace industry, hexavalent chromium is ubiquitously used as it's a very good corrosion control measure, so that these aircraft can be able to stay in flight and as well maintained for a longer period of time. However, there's as well the very obvious concerns that OSHA has and the health hazards that are associated with hexavalent chromium. And for a period of time, my organization was very had tunnel vision almost on hexavalent chromium. Almost every shop that we visited, and we have hundreds of shops and thousands of processes, we were almost only looking at hexavalent chromium rather than anything else. And it wasn't until a few years ago we had this almost brain realization really at this time that we had discovered the health hazard evaluations that were produced, that this was an incorrect way of going about it. Hexavalent chromium evaluations are very, very important, and we need to keep an eye on that. However, there are other very real hazards that are present. And so not only geared by a motivation that we need to analyze and investigate all these other hazards, we need to do so quickly. And so we had discovered that we can be able to not only go out and sample for aluminum or xylene and toluene and noise on top of that, we can also be doing an ergonomic evaluation at the same time. It'll just require what is a tool or what is a training that we can provide to our technicians to be able to assist them. And I'd love to talk about, as far as our personnel that we have in the office, we have one other unique element that we have to our organization. Most likely your organizations, or you've worked with early career professionals who have less than 5 years of experience. Individuals that a lot of times they just need to be coached. They may be very eager, and that's great. That's fantastic. However, they're missing some of the long-term experience that comes from the wisdom of making mistakes and being able to improve from them. They require a lot more hands-on training before they can get up to that point. Very interesting thing about the Department of Defense, especially the Air Force, about half my office of 38 personnel are active duty members. With that half, a predominant number of those individuals are junior airmen, being roughly about 18 to 20 years old. Most of these individuals, they've graduated high school, however, that's it. In addition, on top of that, a majority of them did not choose this career field. So we not only have a difficulty in not having very experienced individuals that are performing these evaluations, but we have an additional hurdle where it's that motivation factor of you need to do a good job, this is why it's important, that they don't inherently have whenever it comes to sometimes formalized training or education that comes from the private sector, or as well traditional hiring approaches. Because we also don't get a decision on who we get. We are told who's coming to our installation. And it's not to be able to complain. It just means that we have to adapt and improvise our approaches on how our technicians go about evaluating. And so this all hazards approach, really looking at that, it's something that we're continuously working on, and we're trying to improve even more. But one of the biggest tools that we have adopted is the use of checklists. That's traditional about everything. And I mean, even Stephen had pointed out a checklist that they had developed for NASA having to do with office ergonomics, as far as looking at specifically certain risk factors with your chair, or settings with your chair, office setup, to be able to help out. Very similarly, I don't think we developed this. I think, like a good government agency, I think we stole it from someone. But that's okay. I mean, in the field of occupational health, as long as I admit that we stole it, it should be all right, right? But this is a very, very brief look at of what our checklist necessarily looks at. A lot of times we're not looking at necessarily an office setting. We have purely industrial areas that we're surveying completely, whether they're painting an entire aircraft or they're ripping out landing gear of the aircraft, or we have areas that have almost 6 miles of overhead track that are constantly dipping parts into 1,000 gallons of dip tanks. We have every sort of process here, and we've found this so that it could be able to assist us in being able to better isolate the frequency, as well as the intensity or duration of the process that's going on, looking at specifically isolating where are most likely the hazard risk factors actually localized on the body. We've taken a better approach, as that has helped our technicians to better understand and visualize how these types of interactions actually affect their body. So this table is split up in both like shoulder and neck, various different body positionings that may impact as far as 1.2 repeated arm forces, as far as roughly equivalent, or I apologize, as far as adding stress onto a piece of equipment, utilizing a tool, or holding or carrying materials exceeding a certain amount of weight, even hand and grip forces in the hand, wrist, and arm, localizing hazards into specific body regions so that we can better understand not necessarily the type of ergonomic hazard as far as stress or forceful exertion that might be present or vibration, but more looking at if we are providing information to our occupational health doctors, where should they be looking at and targeting for these individuals. This goes on to as far as other elements such as, again, focused on the back and torso. How are they moving, and how are their legs and, I guess, performing their job. So I wanted to be able to provide as well some additional, how are we actually emphasizing this? How are we utilizing this? And as far as what makes our approach unique. Checklists, they're not unique. They're not something that necessarily only the Air Force does, but it's how we utilize our approach to performing observations and in-field observations that we've seen a large amount of success in implementing our ergonomics, ergonomic management out here on the base. One of the, well, I guess we'll just go into this very first. So I have two different scenarios that have been able to help us as we've been able to look at and have an emphasis on ergonomics in performing ergonomic style evaluations. One of the biggest things that we've highlighted actually had to deal with the entire purpose of the sampling event, as far as us going out, was not related to ergonomics. We did not go out for an ergonomic assessment. We actually went out for a chemical hazard evaluation. This very first one had to do with chromium-6, for example. So scenario one that we had was that there was an aircraft sanding process. So these individuals are crawling all over this aircraft using orbital sanders to be able to remove coatings or to scuff the outside of the aircraft for future painting operations that are going to be performed. In total, there were 5 personnel. We sampled for chromium-6, and of those 5 personnel, whenever we got the results back, 4 of them were 2 to 3 times over the PEL for chromium-6. And again, this has nothing to do with the hazard necessarily. We have other controls and processes to be able to evaluate that. Don't worry, if you're with OSHA, don't worry about that. But one of the things that we thought was very unique was that there was one individual who was nearly 25 times the PEL, astronomically higher than the other individuals, his other cohorts, even though they did all the exact same job on about the exact same area, but it was just this one individual. And again, one of the most difficult parts of sometimes writing a report or anything like that has to be from not actually performing the sampling, not conducting the analysis, but is better digesting the analysis and why are the results the way that they are. We ran through the situations. Was this individual, was it because he was next to everyone else? No, that wasn't something that we saw. Same thing, it was, okay, well, maybe he was standing on a very unique part of the aircraft. It was, no, that wasn't it. He actually had a sister personnel or sister employee as this individual was laying on top of the wing of an aircraft. And he had someone else on the other wing who was performing the exact same job with the exact same tools. And so we were kind of stumped, and we didn't have an easy answer on what to do. And it wasn't until we were reviewing our notes that we'd seen that the technician who had went out, I as well just want to be able to emphasize that why as well it took us so long to be able to discover this is we have a very unique problem in that it takes roughly about 3 months for us to get any of our sampling data back from the lab. We have to use a very specific lab. They have a very long back order. It takes a long time. So if it makes sense on why we had to rediscover what our observations were, that's a hurdle that we had got to jump through of remembering what did we do 3 months ago. But we had found out that we had conducted an ergonomic assessment. We looked at that ergonomic assessment and we had realized that all 4 of those individuals, they were either standing or they were kneeling, they were performing their job. However, it was this one who, due to his body positioning, he was actually laying on top of the aircraft. So he was just laying down on his stomach, sanding for the entire shift, unlike everyone else. And so from that, his body positioning, we were able to deduce most likely his pump was just acting as a little vacuum, just sucking up all the chromium-6 dust that was on top of the aircraft. This is something that helped us to be able to understand, not only emphasizing the importance of, hey, we need to get better at our observations, but can be able to help further justify our in-field observations for our chemical hazard exposure as well. But what it took was we needed to actually be looking for those types of things. Our ergonomic evaluation of this as well emphasized that the other individuals, as far as his sister employee that was on the other wing, most likely had a larger amount of stress on his back and also his knees and legs due to his positioning, and as far as being on his hands and knees the entire time opposed to laying down. However, there's of course that confounding factor. We weren't able to get accurate chemical results due to this individual laying down, and so it's able to provide us more information as one solution may not be a solution for all. Scenario 2 we'll go through really quickly. It was a painting operation. It was not a follow-up painting operation after the sanding process, but a different one. Employee 1, his chemical results that came back lower than the limit of detection for xylene. Employee 2 came back for xylene just below the PEL. Again, it caused us, we needed to be able to look at what were our actual observations that we were looking into. And this led us to a principle that we'll talk about a little bit later. Ultimately, it led to us, whenever we had interviewed and talked to the employees, we had discovered that employee 2 was actually brand new. He had just started almost a month ago, but employee 1 has been doing this for several years. So possibly having to do with work practices, training. However, it was during the ergonomic evaluation, as the technician was closely looking at and observing how the individual was uniquely performing his process, they noticed that he did a little wrist flick whenever he did his movement with the spray gun. And there was this wrist flick in both an inward and outward direction that most likely caused him to be able to spray his sampling tube or sorbent tube, potentially causing him to have an overexposure above the PEL that we hadn't, or just below the PEL that we hadn't seen before. But it caused again, a greater emphasis that if we were not looking at it from an ergonomic perspective of how these joints are interacting or how this individual is uniquely performing this process, we may not have noticed that in better describing our chemical hazard and why the results are the way that they are. And those could seem like that's kind of a stretch, but at the same time, it's able to provide some sort of rationale. It's able to provide something so that we can come back to the shop with maybe even more questions, but a better reasoning as far as why we need to further look at and investigate it. These are just some quick examples to be able to further highlight how we've sought to be able to improve not only our chemical hazard evaluations, but our ergonomic evaluations as well. We have fully implemented a ergonomic assessment checklist, our system that we feel is appropriate for our specific installation, that our technicians, they bring out a checklist every single time, be able to remind them of all of these various different risk factors and target areas on the human body for them to be able to look at. We also added an emphasis having to train what we refer to as an intensive watch for each single task. And so whenever our individuals, whenever they're observing, they're not just out there. They're not just there looking after the pumps and they're waiting until they can take the pumps off at that time. We encourage and we actually demand our technicians that every single process, for every single personnel that's performing a process, you do what's called an intensive watch of how they are uniquely performing and working at their process. For this, it's 5 uninterrupted minutes. Of course, some processes aren't that long. They can professionally judge how they're going to do that. But for 5 minutes, no note taking. It is just focusing and hyper-focusing on how this individual is performing their process, involving mimicking their actions, focusing on joints that you feel stress, even just watching them being able to move. Focusing again, how are their wrists actually moving? Is it in a neutral position, or are they actually moving it along with the tool that they're utilizing? How are they stepping? How are they stooping? How are they arching their back? Helping them to better recognize what target areas we need to focus on because they may be experiencing stress actually performing this. The overall characteristic with it is we tell them to be able to watch it until you can replay it in your mind of how they were actually working it and how they're actually interacting with their environment while they're performing their task. And then equally important, and after this, the only effective way that we can be able to gauge, did we do an intense enough watch with it, is talking with the employees. Most of these things are unique questions to them on how exactly they're working, specifically having to deal with, hey, I noticed you were arching your back during this specific portion. Why is that? Hey, I noticed that everyone else is spraying up and down and you're going left to right. Why is that? What are you doing during this time? This we've not only been able to see from a data gathering emphasis and importance with it, but we've also been able to see that it's helped us to be able to connect with the employees, which is huge inside of our workplace. Our individuals or our customers that we're seeking to be able to serve and personnel that we're monitoring, a lot of times they don't want us to be there. They feel that we're kind of in the way. But we've been able to see on the back end how emphasizing and even mentioning to them that we're performing an ergonomic evaluation, asking them how they're feeling, and asking some of these target questions that we'll go into in here in a second, has helped us to be able to build a rapport with them. They're more willing to share. And that not only helps us fulfill what we're trying to look at ergonomically, but naturally leaches into they start then probing the questions of other hazards that they're around and other concerns that they have. And a lot of it has to do with, honestly, casualness, but having to do with focusing on the tasks and hazards that they may actually be performed with. Some of my favorite questions to be able to ask individuals, and that goes for ergonomics or anything, has to do with what is the sketchiest thing the Air Force requires you to do. There's sketchy things that every company requires us to do sometimes. Sometimes we just don't know it as a professional. And the same thing, if you ever want to get someone to talk, have them talk about themselves. If you want to get them to not stop talking, ask them about a complaint that they have, and they will talk your ear off. Same thing, another good question to be able to ask them is, by lunchtime, where are you hurting the most? Like, what are you feeling by the time that you get home? Same thing, what process or task do you feel that makes you feel the most drained? It's, oh, dude, if we have to do this task, I'm done. I'm done for the day. I have to take a minute and settle down. This helps us to be able to target in. Again, we are not experts whenever it comes to their job. That's the customer. That's the personnel that we're looking at. And it's uncovering almost, undoing that onion almost of what do we specifically need to focus on. And another golden question that can apply really to anything whenever interacting with someone is, where do you see your next incident or near miss occurring? Where do you see that this is going to happen? Everyone inherently does care about their health, whether they know it or not. They do. And so everyone can be able to see where is that sketchy part that we can be able to look into. But a necessity and a necessary item is that we have to have that rapport and have to have that relationship with them for them to be able to open up. And fortunately, we've been able to see, as we emphasize ergonomic assessments and making sure that our customers are aware that we're doing and we're performing ergonomic assessments. Out there in the field, we tell them every time, I'm going to do an ergonomic assessment while I'm doing this. And that immediately perks them up. That's something that everyone has a foundational knowledge, or at least a buzzword knowledge of the word ergonomics, even if they don't use it correctly. Some ergonomic desks are not very ergonomic, if you ask me, but everyone generally knows about it, and they can further see us as being a resource and a benefit to not only them, but also to the organization. Some further benefits, just wanting to be able to emphasize, again, this is, I don't know why that was there, the benefits that we have from this new redefined approach of emphasizing ergonomic assessments in everything that we do, as well as emphasizing that while we're out there for a chemical hazard evaluation or a physical hazard evaluation, that we still take the time to intensively watch the processes and the individuals and how they work. Is we have improved rationale for chemical and noise exposure evaluations. Naturally, we have further justification. Why are the results the way that they are? We can be able to further justify, is it truly body positioning? Is it potentially having to do with, hey, as time goes on, people are feeling fatigued, and so naturally their posturing or how they perform their job is going to impact their chemical exposure, how well they're following as far as PPE donning, doffing procedures. Those things can be able to play into our overall characterization of other hazards that we have out in the field, as well as increased specificity with control recommendations. This can be able to really help out and increase customer buy-off. We had a system for reporting ergonomic evaluations that we had, which was a very template-driven thing that based upon the hazard area that it was. If it's your shoulder, all right, we have XYZ recommendation. And the biggest thing that we had coming back was, how does this apply to where I'm at? And so dealing with the specificity of making specific control recommendations for specific hazards can really be able to help us not only in better controlling the hazard that's present, but also in customer buy-off, actually implementing these controls. With other organizations, it can be a little bit different. You may have a little bit more teeth and authority whenever it comes to the decisions of implementing process changes. However, at least in our current side of it, we have no authority. We can be able to illustrate there's an issue here that needs to be fixed. But at the end of the day, it's completely up to the customer on whether they actually implement a control, whether they actually take any step into improving the occupational health of their personnel out in the shop. And so the more that we can do in providing very specific recommendations so that the customer feels more confident in our actual approach, and it feels like we're actually providing a personalized and unique document and recommendation specific to the observations that we can now better produce, that's something that can be able to further help that interaction and that cohesion between our organizations, as well as customer support, employee participation. Again, as we've been able to see, and it took a little bit of time, we didn't directly go for it for this reason. It was a natural occurrence, is that individuals were a lot more willing to be able to speak to us because they could relate to ergonomics. A lot of the times it's harder to be able to relate to noise or to chemical hazards beyond an acute exposure. Whenever we're dealing with chromium-6, and these individuals, again, they've been working and doing this for 20 years. And sometimes it's hard to be able to tell them, hey, if you don't do XYZ control, you're going to get cancer 40 years from now. That can be a harder thing to be able to conceptualize. However, ergonomics, one of the beautiful things about it is that it both has chronic and acute effects that can be readily seen and readily experienced without, well, sometimes there's lasting issues that can be permanent, but they can readily see how this implementation can help them right now, rather than hoping that they get the spirit of our recommendation in the end. And so that employee participation is a huge thing, and it's a massive asset whenever it comes to performing occupational health related work, as we largely depend upon our customers, upon our other employees to provide us meaningful data. I love that there's that typical definition of industrial hygiene, having to do with its people who anticipate, identify, and recognize workplace hazards. There's also like the evaluation, that typical standard definition. But a better one has to do with that industrial hygienists are people who do precision guesswork based on unreliable data provided by those of questionable knowledge sometimes. And that sometimes we wish the people doing the process had our educational background, because then they would know what information to give us. But we're not privileged in that all the time. But this is a stair step in something that can help us so that they're consciously or occupational health minded in not only their approach, but also in providing our information back to us. At the end of this, to be able to summarize, there's one of the biggest things that we've seen as far as impacting our success in implementing an ergonomic program has to do with necessarily picking an idea and going forward with it. It's very similar to how ergonomic hazards need to be uniquely controlled. Ergonomic procedures, or the process and how you manage your ergonomic program, similarly has to be very unique to your organization. Just because this checklist system and this emphasis on training or observational skill training works for our organization doesn't mean it's going to work for any other organization. This is something that we've been able to see to be a great benefit to our individuals. But I thank you so very much. I appreciate your time, and I'd love to be able to go over some of your questions that you have. I'm seeing a. All right. There. I think that was the last one, having to do with the oil field and participating in ergonomic screenings. Stephen Mills, vibration and static posture will indeed get you while commuting in motor vehicles. Yes, absolutely. Again, it's one of those things of oftentimes we may stress or really look at the those very intensive or very explosive or dynamic movements, but sometimes as well, ergonomics, it has to do with sometimes no movement at all. It's not necessarily the answer to any sort of issue that we have. Indication of similar exposure groups in relation to regions of the body impacted by performing a task. Absolutely. One of the things that we had identified, the Air Force, they have a database known as DOORS. If you've ever worked with that, I'm sorry. It is a cobbled together thing. The concept is beautiful, but it's the execution. There's some wonky things. One of the things was that they did not emphasize dealing with ergonomics. They emphasize the hazards. So, for example, thermal stress or mental stress or forceful exertion or vibration. But whenever it comes to us, that doesn't really help us whenever it comes to, we need to understand what is this actually impacting and how does this actually play into into how they're performing their operation, so that we can provide an accurate control. Because just doing a anti-vibration gloves, that's not going to help out the individual that's doing that's a truck driver. And so we realized that there's information that we were kind of lacking on our end as far as our database. Curious about the number of CPEs. Many CPEs use other titles like CHFP, like myself, and titles in Europe and Asia are different. If you're only looking at CPEs, you may be limiting yourself. Absolutely, that's a very great point. As well. I will admit I am not the foremost authority whenever it comes to the certification routes for ergonomists, but there are a multitude of other certifications that are present for it. That was mostly to be able to illustrate as far as a weird dynamic that the government sometimes has as far as not having an emphasis on that certification or even education in general for their trained staff. And so we were very unique and fortunate, at least, that we were able to secure someone who at least has that sort of specific designation for ergonomics. So that is a very great point, Eileen. Thank you so much. And any other questions? Looks like a few people were typing. Okay, can you briefly describe your chromium-6 sampling and analysis method and procedure? Do you use a special analysis method to detect chromium-6? Absolutely. I love non-ergonomic related questions because I feel more comfortable with chemical evaluations. But yeah, so for hexavalent chromium, we utilize NIOSH method 7605. With that, it's a modified Air Force version that we utilize. As far as the specific analysis method that is conducted, I'm sorry, I can't remember that. You should be able to find the information on it, NIOSH 7605 for it. It typically allows the flexibility, like most NIOSH methods. We can be able to range from about 1 to 4 liters per minute, with the biggest caveat and limiting factor being the max volume load and it only being 400 liters. And so most of our processes, they're occurring for 8 to 10 hours a day. A lot of split sampling has to be able to occur. But that's the analysis that we utilize to be able to detect chromium-6. If there are any other specific questions related to that, please let me know. I might have missed something if you had a specific target answer that you were looking for. And I'm also open as well. Let me go to the very beginning, just my email. If you guys have any other questions that you didn't think about right now, or you just don't want to type it out, maybe you'll feel better typing it out in an email. Just right there at the very bottom, alex.d.cardoni.cid@health.mil. I'm more than willing to be able to answer any questions, both related to ergonomics or as well perspective with the Air Force or other industrial hygiene monitoring that we perform. The thing I love, if you've never interacted with the military or been on a military base, it's like a little city. And so there is every type of job imaginable on a base that you would find working for a municipality or anything else. We have our own water treatment systems typically. That includes, I guess, wastewater treatment, including as well hazardous wastewater treatment that might be present, as well as other extended missions. We have grocery stores where we have meat departments that are cutting meat all day. We have almost any type of specific job classification here. And so it's a very unique opportunity. I would love to be able to brainstorm any other questions they might have with other specific fields or industries as well.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Alex. Anybody have any last questions before? And I guess, but well, thank you all three of you for speaking today. I think it was really great. I really enjoyed listening to everything that you guys have had to say and share with us today. I was going to just remind you quickly, please don't forget to complete the session surveys that are going to be mailed out to you shortly. And then upon the completion, certificates will be sent out as well for those of you that are interested in those. And yeah, like I said, this is a reoccurring series. We'll probably take the next couple of months off. I think our next one is going to be in September. So keep an eye on our website of all the different courses that we offer. And we would love to have you guys join us again. All right, well, great job today, guys. And thank you so much. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.